Good evening and welcome to the Wakefield School Committee meeting of Tuesday, April 10th, 2018. I'll begin by calling this meeting to order and we'll stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And as always, I'll read the mission statement. The vision of the Wakefield Public Schools is to graduate students who are confident, lifelong learners, who are respectful and caring members of their community. Our mission is to prepare students for college, career, and community by providing rich and challenging curriculum, high-quality instruction, and educational experiences that meet their individual needs and interests. Okay, and with that, we have a public comment period tonight. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak? Okay, seeing none. We'll move directly into our next agenda item, our FY19 budget discussion and vote. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Smith if you've got anything that you want to say beforehand.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll just kick off a few pieces. First of all, last week we had a lot, or the last meeting, we had a lot of discussion about reading information, and a number of you asked me to go back and to get some information on reading services and just information in general on reading in the Wakefield Public Schools. I really appreciated that Lynn O'Neill, our Director of Special Education, who's here with us tonight, did some of the research. I sent this to you. I'll just make a few comments about it. She did a nice job describing what is dyslexia, what's a specific learning disability, some information about the national average of reading disabilities in school-age children. So we really appreciate all of that information. Lynn, thank you. And then we got to what's happening in the Wakefield Public Schools. So, Lynn was able to share with us that we currently have 625 active IEPs. 120 of those list a specific learning disability as the primary diagnosis, but that would include reading, math, and written language as a whole. And then the data shows that 72 out of the 120 identified as having a specific learning disability have reading-related services or goals. So that could be decoding, encoding, fluency, or comprehension. And then the percentage of special education students in the Wakefield Public Schools that have a specific learning disability in reading. So it's just about 2% of our total school population of 3,500 students have been identified as having a specific learning disability in reading. So, and then she goes on to explain a little bit to the school committee, which I hope was helpful, how students with a specific learning disability in reading require a multi-sensory structured approach to reading, and that can be provided either in small group or one-to-one, depending on the student's needs. And we really have a wide range of student needs. And then, as you read, Lynn was able to talk us through who delivers the reading services in the Wakefield Public Schools, how many people we have certified in each area, how many people we have trained in different areas, certification being a higher level than training, at each grade level band, and the different programs, including Wilson, Orton Gillingham, LIPS, Read Naturally, Great Leaps, and others that we utilize. One point that I wanted to make sure that I made is that, with the introduction and implementation of our new phonics curriculum in grades K to 2, and we began that in 2015, referrals across our elementary schools to the language-based classroom have decreased significantly. So I think that is one very important approach, too, is that proactive approach of having a strong phonics program. Lynn also was asked to provide some information about out-of-district placements and the number of students that are out of district specifically for required specialized reading services. There are 5. And the total tuition cost for those 5 students is $246,950. And the cost of transportation is $22,500. So those were all answers to the very specific questions that you had asked. I'd really asked Lynn to kind of do a deep dive on, what do we need right now based on student IEPs as we study all of the IEPs we have and what kids currently have to make sure that we have comprehensive reading intervention services. What do we need in FY19? And she said, she really feels additional support of between a 0.8 FTE and a 1.5 FTE in, somewhere in that, grade 3 to 10 band would be of a big help to us in this coming year to really support students. I think we've also just talked about kind of longer term planning. This isn't just about 1 year. This is just not about FY19. As you know, I had 2 years ago in the FY18 budget, I had added a district intervention services line. That's something we've never had in the school department budget for. And it, is specifically for this type of purpose, to really bring in contracted services or to hire our own teachers that belong to the Wakefield Public Schools that can target some of these services that we might need, whether it's in reading or even, you heard some of the parents the other night to talk about anxiety or social, emotional, behavioral issues and so forth. So last year we added the line in the budget. This year we added more money to it, and we're currently at $75,000. My recommendation, as I emailed to you this week, is that we use all of the $75,000 really in light of our kind of the feedback parents are giving us right now, that we use all of that to its reading intervention services in this coming school year. I think that would be a good move, and according to Lynn's data, and then we can continue to look at our data and really use the data to kind of inform where we're going for the next 3 to 5 to even 10 years in that area. The other thing I wanted to just mention that kind of occurred to me as we were talking, we've been really focused on this district line, but I asked Mike to also pull the information that we also have intervention lines and interventionists at each school and reading specialists at each school. So I just didn't know if you could just review that data as well.
Sure, it's all in the budget books. On every budget page, on the first page for each school, there's a reading specialist line and also an intervention line. Reading specialist in the top third of the page. The intervention is probably about halfway down the page on each budget sheet. But each school has a different amount, anywhere between $9,000 and about $13,000, and that's pretty discretionary for the principal to use for intervention services, whether it be around reading or behavior or whatever they feel the need is. In the past, a lot of it's been used for math intervention or reading intervention. More recently, about more around social emotional health. So they have that. All total in the district, we have $55,500 on top of the $75,000 that's in the district line. So that really brings us up to about $130,000 in the intervention line that can be used. It's not earmarked specifically for any services and can be used throughout the year to attend to immediate needs and situations that arise throughout the year. So did want to bring that up. And then on the reading side, all of our schools have K-6, or K-8, I should say, have reading specialists embedded in the schools, and those range from anywhere from $9,000 to $135,000, depending on the school and the needs of the school. So all total for reading specialist salaries throughout the district, it's about $384,000 that we have dedicated to reading specialists. And this is outside of the literacy coaches. The literacy coaches are above and beyond that. But we do have about $384,000 in salaries dedicated to reading specialists, and I think that ties back to Lynn's notes as far as who's, what the reading specialists are trained in. Some of the ones that are trained in OG or Wilson or LIPS. Did I get them all? Mostly? All right. But yeah, those are where our specialists are trained, and they have the specialized training to teach that subject matter. So just wanted to point out those two areas that we haven't discussed before, that there was some money other places in the budget to support some of these services that are needed.
So I think that's where we are with that right now, but I did bring Lynn O'Neill here if either myself or Lynn could answer any other specific questions that maybe came up this week as you received the information from us.
Just for clarification, that additional money that's discretionary,
Yeah.
is that utilized mostly from like hiring a consultant rather than having an employee?
So we could do it either way. This past year, I used it only to contract out services. That provided me with a little bit more flexibility, and Lynn and the team. But if we want to, we can turn it into an FTE. If we think it's more, we'll get more bang for our buck to hire someone and bring the person in, we can certainly do that as well.
That's right. I wasn't saying one way was better.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know
Yeah.
what was the best way, you felt was the best way to do it.
Mr. Yaffe.
Thanks, Rob. So, Lynn, I wonder if one of the central themes that emerged from a lot of the parent advocacy that we heard was this question of out-of-district versus in-district. And so we spoke a little bit about it last night with the Board of Selectmen, and I think it would help both the school committee and the community at large to have a deeper understanding of how you and your team approach the question of when a student needs out-of-district services, and how you balance that against the broader goal of trying to integrate as many of our students within the Wakefield Public Schools as possible. So, if you could talk a little bit about the philosophy that you use when you're approaching those conversations.
Sure. So first of all, our primary focus is to get students what they need in district, in their home school, with their friends, in the community in which they've grown up, and the community that their neighborhood friends would attend the same school. Mm-hmm. That's our primary goal. More importantly than that, as importantly as that, mm-hmm. is getting students that if a student has a specific need that goes beyond the scope of what we service appropriately, right. That's when that discussion would start. Right. So there's no discussion that starts until we have, thought outside the box, had brainstorming sessions, really done everything but, thrown in the kitchen sink. That's when that discussion would start. We have, when we look at reading specifically, we have the tools here. We have the training. Sometimes it's, the resources are just not enough. Right. the frequency of service just isn't able to be met at a school level. But I will tell you, I'm very proud of the work that the special education teachers, the general education teachers, and the administrators at each building do. We have some students at the elementary level who have worked their way through OG, Wilson. Neither of them were working for any type of progress monitoring. We were seeing no success. We had students go through LIPS next. There was small success, just small. So we increased the LIPS. We opted to have a specialized LIPS program through the summer. So there are things that just because we haven't had it doesn't mean we can't do it. Right. And so we try all of those things first. Because in life, this is sort of the general philosophy, in life you have to read. Right. You have to be able to read. Yeah, yeah. So it's our job to make sure that can happen in our buildings, or really go down really sweating trying to think of the next piece. When we can't think of the next piece, when a student isn't making the progress that we really feel that they need to make, that's when we entertain the idea of going out beyond our walls.
Great, thank you. That's a great summary. So just one quick follow-up, and I think it was a statistic that RJ cited at the last meeting, and you may not know this, but the percentage of students that we send out of district, how does that align generally with the state, and is it pretty close? In other words, we're not an outlier.
No,
yeah, okay.
We're not an outlier. I don't know the exact percentage. I have talked about that this year in particular. The SEAM collaborative districts, the special education directors we're a cohort. We meet monthly, and we often sort of compare numbers. We are pretty much sort of under the we're on the lower end of out-of-district tuitions compared to our student body total population.
Right, that's the number I was
There are smaller
looking at. Yeah,
districts
yeah.
that have way more students out of district.
Yeah, and that's in terms of the SEAM communities, and there are how many of those?
10, I
10.
believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And just sort of as an added piece, most of our, I mean, we have, approximately 40 students. That's fluid also.
Right.
Out of district tuitions are fluid because we're always looking to build the programming or to have students who have gotten what they need out of district come back. But there are approximately 40, and the majority of our out-of-district placements are for students who their needs are very prescriptive. Their needs are very, complex. They are not, as I said, 5, we have very few students who are out for like a reading-only disability.
Right.
More of our kids are out for needs that really are beyond the scope of what we are designed to handle in a typical classroom.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, for indulging me in one last set of questions as we get to the end of the process.
I think there was one statistic that Dr. Smith quoted last night that I think really rang true with me, especially with the 40 or 41 children we have out. They're in like 25 different places.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to demonstrate how specialized and how careful placements are chosen. And I think the desire for people to say, well, just don't do outside placements and bring them all back in is, I think that's kind of oversimplified and not really possible. I mean, if this degree of thought and care is taken to get just the right placement for very specific reasons, and we don't just send everybody to one place, I think it really demonstrates the need that you can't just bring them back. If it was that simple, we would have done it in the first place, I think.
So I just want to clarify, Lynn, that when an IEP is written, there are specific needs that are outlined, certain lengths of time that a student spends with a specialist, and if there's other very specific needs outside of the classroom that need to be accommodated, that's spelled out essentially in the IEP.
Right.
Have you ever had, well, not ever had, but are there times when, due to, say, lack of skilled people in a particular area, or just staff in general, that we don't meet that need of a student?
So I would say that that we work really hard to have all of our professional teaching staff skilled in the area of special education in general, or reading specialists, or there are specific specialized programs that those teachers may not have training in. There's like a subset of the teaching staff that have training in specific programming, specific reading instruction. So there are the curriculum out there that is talked about for the dyslexic population, for specific learning disability population. We have staff that are trained in those programs. There are times where we have more students that need those pieces than we have slots in the day. So we do look to be creative around that. We do look for grouping students when it's appropriate. We also look, you sort of bump up against obstacles with the schedule itself. For example, there are students who love PE or love art or love chorus, but they also need, say at the Galvin, English, math, science, social studies. So where do you take them for that specialized reading instruction? And so you're trying to brainstorm around what the schedule could look like. So we look outside of the box. Can they stay for 45 minutes after school? Can they come 45 minutes before school? You know, do we do, say, art or PE only, you know, every other time that it's scheduled? So we look at those pieces, but it becomes more difficult at the 5 through 12 level because of the nature of the schedule, and then the staff that fits into that schedule. But it's not that we have the skill, we have the will, but it's not, it just, at times the schedule sort of works against those pieces. So.
And if you do have someone who elects to go before school, the student goes before school or stays after school, are the staff members compensated additionally?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions for Lynn or me on reading services? Okay, so thank you very
Okay,
much, Lynn.
thank you.
And then the only other thing I just brought with me that I just left for you today is just a copy of the strategy and the 5-year curriculum review and replacement cycle to make sure you had that, and then a 1-page summary of the increase, decrease by area and location. Since we're coming into a budget discussion, I just wanted to make sure that everyone had that sort of snapshot in front of you, if you had any questions. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Okay, so I think we'll start with the motion. Is there a motion that the school committee approve the FY19 Wakefield School Department budget as presented?
So, second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Anyone? Mr. Massey?
Yep. So, first off, I actually do think Kim and Mike, you guys did a good job reorganizing the budget and making cuts where we can with the operational side of the budget. I know it's difficult. Again, the high increases in special education this year definitely put us in a bind, and I definitely feel bad about that. But in my personal opinion, with that being said, whether unofficial or not, there was an obligation that we would honor the threshold of 4% or less for 3 years after the generous 11% increase a couple of years ago. For my personal vote last year, I made a commitment to offer an exception to this for several reasons, but one being that we honor the 4% threshold this year in the third and final year. And if we don't, that means we didn't honor it 2 out of 3 years in that promise. Now, I'm all for making sure our faculty and staff are well compensated, but when the labor subcommittee was in negotiations with the union, even though I wasn't part of the subcommittee, we're all really partly responsible for this, including myself. We really should have been more aware that the increases in salaries alone would, increase over 4% year over year in the budget, which is much better than myself and many of us did in the private sector. So if we wanted to do that, we'd have to tighten up or make cuts in other areas where we really didn't want to. So I kind of look back at the historical increases over the past 10, 15 years just to get a little bit of a perspective. There were definitely some years where there was negative increases, 1%, 2%. I'm not saying we should go back to that, but I think it is definitely achievable to stay below or at least closer to the 4% mark. With all this being said, it's obviously a very difficult decision for me, but one that I'm actually going to be deciding to vote against the budget tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Ms. Fortier?
May I have a comment?
Yes,
towards Mr.
absolutely, of
Massey?
course.
So, Mr. Massey, do you have any areas that you would cut from the 5.54%?
I don't know what the exact stipulations are on contract obligations. I do know there was a good job of certain cuts that were made in this budget. And again, I'd have to be presented options with all different sorts of avenues of, again, where we can get at least closer to the 4% mark. I do know that 5.54 is very high, and I have to stay true to myself and what I said last year and stick to my word. I went for it last year, but this year is a little bit different.
I understand that. I'm just wondering, it's easy to just say, I'm sticking with my word without necessarily having a plan going forward, or even having some ideas to what you would look towards. So it sounds like you're focusing primarily on the personnel area, which there may not be, a whole lot of leeway with that. It is, these are contractual obligations. Operational costs are minimal. So then I'm looking at special education as being a really big chunk that has set us right over the that 4%. And I can't imagine that you'd be interested in removing any part of that funding.
No, I mean, there's really not much around that we could do, but actually, I kind of was interested in option B, to be honest with you, at the outset, but I know I was in the minority on that one, so I didn't think it really stood a chance. But with this being said, you know, there is ways we've done it in the past. There could be a way this year that we could do it. You know, we just decided to go in a different direction, which is fine, but I have to stick to my principles, and this is how I feel.
Mr. Liakos.
Thanks, Rob. So I'll just make some general comments. I will support the budget tonight. And there, I think I've approached each budget according to some basic principles. So is the budget grounded in our instructional strategy of quality teaching, rigorous curriculum, and individualized student learning? The answer to that is yes. RJ, I hear what you're saying, but I actually don't regret the vote for the contracts, because the vote for the contracts and for the increases to salaries and benefits and support goes to the heart of that quality teaching instructional strategy goal. Because if we're going to have a first-class school system, we need to attract, retain, and develop a first-class teaching workforce in a highly competitive, knowledge-based economy here in Massachusetts. And we weren't doing that for a long time as a school district, but we are doing it now, and pay is a big part of that. So, so the budget, including the teacher pay, educator pay, and for the support staff, is a key part of the instructional strategy. Is the budget a result of an open, transparent, and thoughtful process? Yes, absolutely. Dr. Smith and her team did an exceptional job surveying both our educators, parents, all the stakeholders in the school system, as they have done in the past, getting feedback, setting priorities, balancing lots of different interests, and coming up with a thoughtful and well-balanced plan. Number 3, is it fiscally responsible? Yes, I believe it is. Yes, we did not meet the 4% mark. We tried. Dr. Smith and her team tried very hard. We did not anticipate over $500,000 in special education costs that put us over. But in my opinion, the 4% was an aspiration. It was a goal. It wasn't meant to be a hard and fast number, because in fact, you know, we can't operate that way. We can't operate that way as a school district. As we've talked about with the conversation around special education, we're working in a context of federal and state law, state mandates, and balancing up against our objectives as a school system to serve every child in an inclusion model. For all of those reasons, I support the budget. And I'll just say something specifically about the special education costs. I really appreciate the advocacy from the parents. They told some incredibly compelling stories about their own children that I think illuminated for us the challenges that many of them face, both as parents and as advocates for their own children. Even though the system is not working perfectly for every family, I think we've demonstrated that the system as a whole is meeting a lot of these students' needs. And in fact, I think the advocacy in many ways reaffirms the approach that we've been taking and the investments we've made and continue to make in intervention services, in social and emotional learning, and in the inclusion model. So for all those reasons and many others, I think this is a good budget that I'll support. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Liakos. Mr. Callahan.
I also just am surprised at your comments, Mr. Massey, mostly because I did, you know, I guess I'm fortunate enough to have had the ability to take time off of my job to attend the presentation from all department heads, which I understand it's a weekday in the middle of the afternoon, and most people can't do that, and I'm fortunate that I was able to. And I was able to hear all the justifications for the requests that came through, that we couldn't possibly meet them all, but hearing the justifications behind the scenes is very helpful. And then also, I did attend the evening meeting with the Finance Committee 6 weeks ago, where we went over our preliminary numbers and the two different approaches that we talked about. And it was in fact the Finance Committee that wanted us to come back this way and not the other way. And you know, we've had a lot of involvement from the Finance Committee back since October. And I think that you'll find that tomorrow night's meeting, I'm sure there'll be a lot of lively discussion, but I think you'll find that the Finance Committee is appreciative of the way we've approached the budget. And I would be really surprised to see anything but support from them at this point. So, you know, because we've done such a good job laying things out. And, you know, this is, I don't think anybody can anticipate 4 years ago what inflation's going to do to our district costs and all the underlying costs of running a school district of this size.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Ms. Morgan.
I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the community for their engagement in this budget process. This is, I think, the most community feedback I've seen in all my years on the committee. And their advocacy, it worked. It made us look at something that we weren't necessarily looking at. And I also hope we can continue to look at the data. I know the data doesn't always tell the whole story, but in this case, it did. It backed up what we were hearing, and it's worked out, I think, well for all parties involved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Any other discussion? Mr. Markham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to add to support some of the comments from around the table, and in particular the one that Kate just made with regard to the community, to the outreach that we have seen in recent weeks and days. With a particular interest in many people that have chosen to share a story, sometimes a very difficult story, not one that we haven't heard before, and not one that many of us haven't experienced in our own dealings with our own children. But it takes a special type of advocacy, and that should only be appreciated and commended. Having said that, I want to say from the outset that I intend to support this budget. I believe that our job as a school committee are first and foremost to be advocates for quality education, to be advocates for the type of resources that we need to improve our schools. Of course, we need to do that within fiscal mindedness and fiscal responsibility, and I think the work of the budget subcommittee this year has brought us to a really good place in that regard. Working with town officials brings us that mindedness, but we still need to maintain our role as advocates, and we need to be passionate advocates. That is what our elected responsibility is, in my estimation. Secondly, I'm very interested in the intervention, our services line that has been a topic of discussion in recent weeks and days. One of the things that in thinking about that, I want to, of course, first and foremost congratulate Superintendent Smith and her team that they put this on our radar screen about 18 months ago. And that's something that is critically important. The fact that this exists as a line item in the FY18 budget means that there was thoughtful and depth going into this need well before the last couple of weeks. So that shouldn't go overlooked at all. Can we do better? Sure. Do we need to? Indeed. The fact that we have $60,000 in the FY18 budget, this budget calls for 75. Putting more services into Galvin, increasing a 1.0 reading specialist. I think those are tremendously good starts. What I wanted to speak about more with regard to the intervention line that we've received a lot of data in recent years. We've got it from the administration, we've got it from teachers, we've got it from advocates involved in risk surveys, student behavioral surveys, talking about not just academic interventions, but social, emotional, and behavioral. Lots of context there that we need to be looking much more closely at. The increase in this year's or in FY19's budget line is certainly not enough. I'm not sure what is enough, but it's a good start for year two. A commitment that I would like to make to my fellow members of the committee and to the community is that we commit with the new superintendent and Mr. Piffling and as a committee to not wait till the budget process for fiscal year 20, not wait till the opening day of school, but begin something in earnest in the coming weeks and coming months to see what we can do within the fiscal 19 context to increase some services in the intervention services line. There is a creative process that comes to be. Things settle, things shake out in coming weeks and months. There's more information that we need to receive from the state, what the state budget's going to look like, what not only Chapter 70 is going to look like, but what the circuit breaker is going to look like. We put our creative energies behind a process, and over the summer and into the early fall, I'm highly convinced, knowing the process as I do and knowing the process that my colleagues share, I'm highly convinced that we can continue to do even better for intervention services. So I'd like to make that as a commitment moving forward. But quality teaching and quality teachers deserve the pay we get, deserve the pay that we can afford. And if we're going to continue, I would just in following up what Mr. Liaco said, we're going to continue to expect nothing but more. We're going to ask teachers to do more. We're asking them to do more with less in many, many circumstances. We have to be able to recruit, train, and retain quality teachers. We haven't seen the advancements that have come in recent years between Dr. Smith and immediately before her, Dr. Reich. Advancements of school designations. Level 1 schools in this town came about in the last 5 years. That didn't happen by happenstance. That didn't happen just because we blinked an eye and all of a sudden things came together. We as a committee and we as a community got really behind advocating for needs. We exploded some great long overdue curriculum and technology and professional development, and yes, and teacher contracts and paraprofessional contracts. And I think the children of this town are better off for it. I certainly support the work of Dr. Smith, support and thank the work of the Budget Subcommittee, and I have and I'm very pleased to support the FY19 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Markham. Any other discussion? Ms. Fortier.
One more comment. I too will support this budget. I think it's fair for people to understand that when, as a budget, we count, as a district, we count on monies from the state, and they don't always arrive fully funded. And it's not as though we, can't buy that front loader this year. I mean, these are kids who have needs and requirements for quality education, and we're going to fund them. So I want to remind people that we had a budget last year that was, again, we had discussion last year about it being a little over 4%. What was the I guess, thought of as the threshold, and we got blindsided by a considerable amount of money that we needed to put forth in out-of-district placements, and Dr. Smith and Mike Piffling cut where they could cut. I mean, they moved and they, really trimmed down a lot of things that were kind of by happenstance and available. You know, we just don't have a lot of fat, if any, in this budget. And whenever we had to make any adjustments, or they had to make any adjustments, it was, you know, by some circumstance beyond our control, a retirement, et cetera. So I fully support our current budget, and I really appreciate your comments, Mr. Liakos. I totally agree with them all. Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, I'll just say, and I'll be very brief because I'm just going to wholeheartedly echo what Ms. Morgan said, thanking the parents and the community for their advocacy in this budget. I think you truly did move the needle. I think some things may have not happened in this budget but for that advocacy, so I thank all those who spoke and came forward with very personal stories. And I'll wholeheartedly echo Ms. Fortier's comments about the state. You know, that's a very difficult thing that our administration, that the school committee has to budget for when promised money is not there. In the amounts of hundreds of thousands of dollars that would be put forth to services, especially things like our circuit breaker. You know, obviously FY18 we saw what we went through in special education, and it only makes it more difficult when money that is promised to us is not there. And the last thing, just with respect to this 4% discussion, you know, as somebody who last year did not support a budget because it was above 4%, one of the things I set out to do in my first meeting with Dr. Smith as chairman, and in my first conversation with Mr. Callanan after I became chair, was to create inroads with the Finance Committee so that did not happen again, that sort of discussion did not happen again this year. And it didn't. The truth is that the Finance Committee, based on everything that I've heard, is supportive of this budget, thinks that it's a fiscally responsible and a fiscally fair budget. And I thank Mr. Callanan, and I thank the administration, Dr. Smith and Mr. Piffeling, and all the members of the Budget Subcommittee for having those discussions earlier in this budget cycle. Okay, and with that, the motion to approve the FY19 budget has been made and has been seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. All right. Do we want to do this quickly? Yeah. I'm just going to go a little bit out of order now in the few minutes that we have, because we do need to, almost as a formality, just vote on our MSBA statement of interest. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Smith. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this, or.
I don't think so. I think we're ready to go.
So this is a lengthy motion. I just asked Mr. Markham. We do need to get the language very precise for this MSBA SOI. So Mr. Markham, if you wouldn't mind just helping me out.
With pleasure, Mr. Chairman. Having convened in an open meeting on April 10, 2018, prior to the closing date, the school committee of the town of Wakefield, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the Statement of Interest form dated April 6, 2018, for Wakefield Memorial High School, located at 60 Farm Street, which describes and explains the following deficiencies in the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future to prevent a loss of accreditation: to replace, renovate, or modernize the school's building systems, including the roofs, windows, exterior walls, heating, cooling, ventilation, plumbing, electrical, and fire protection systems; to increase energy efficiency and conservation, and to decrease energy-related costs for the school facility; and to replace obsolete space by replacing, renovating, or adding onto the school to provide for a full range of educational programs consistent with the state and approved local requirements. And hereby further specifically acknowledges that the submitting of this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the city, city, town, region, school district to fulfilling an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Second. Thank you. Okay. Motion has been made and seconded.
Want me to read that again? Would you read that? What was the part in the middle?
Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion on this? Mr. Liakos.
Just a quick question, Kim. I think I know the answer, but just maybe for the public. This is essentially the same application that we have filed. Now, this is the third time?
This is the second time with this specific
application,
that was
okay.
informed by that very significant feasibility study.
Right,
That was
okay.
kind of the point of that feasibility
Yes.
study that the Permanent Building Committee sponsored, so that we could inform a really robust application. And so this is the second time.
Second time, right. And no significant deviation from the
No,
original?
no,
Right,
no.
okay. It's really the same.
Really the
plan.
same
Yeah,
application,
okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. Okay. So being that there is actually nothing of substance on the agenda until our superintendent candidate interviews and that we have just under 15 minutes, I wonder if, given that we're going to be going at it for quite a while tonight, maybe we may want to recess until 6 o'clock, just so we can breathe a little.
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, and is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? All right, we'll recess until 6. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening and welcome back to the Wakefield School Committee meeting of Tuesday, April 10th, 2018. We will call this meeting back to order. Our next agenda item is the first of our superintendent candidate interviews. We're joined here by our current assistant superintendent, Mr. Douglas Lyons. And I will turn it over to Tom, actually, to see if you want to go ahead and follow this rubric that you've so kindly laid out for us.
Very nice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening all. Good evening to the community, and good evening, Mr. Lyons, and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
So to begin with an opening statement, please help us by bring your resume to life, telling us about your education, background, experience, as well as what professional goals brought you here to apply for the position of superintendent in Wakefield.
Sure. Thank you very much. My undergraduate education, I majored in marine engineering. I graduated from Massachusetts Maritime Academy. When I got out of school, I worked for Military Sealift Command for just under 7 years. After that, or just before I ended my time at Military Sealift Command, I decided that I wanted to make a career change and become a teacher. And at that point in time, an old mentor teacher of mine was in touch when I was on leave and asked me if I would be willing to interview for a teaching position at a private school, Bridgeton Academy in North Bridgeton, Maine. And I interviewed in Cambridge at the Harvard Graduate School, and I got the job, and that changed everything. And so I moved my then young family, we had one child at the time, we moved to North Bridgeton, Maine, where I taught there and lived in a dorm and coached for 3 years. After that time, our oldest was getting to be about kindergarten age. We had family here in Massachusetts, so we moved back to Mass. And just to be closer to family, I got a job teaching math at a local high school, and we went from there. I went to graduate school at Simmons College. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in education leadership. Shortly after I finished that program, I was an assistant principal in Chelsea. I also taught at Simmons for a period of 3 years after I left the program. I taught in the education leadership program. And, I think that the rest is I don't want to say history, but to speed it up a little bit, I moved from assistant principal to principal, and prior to coming to Wakefield, where I've been assistant superintendent for the last 3 years, I was an assistant principal and principal at a middle school in Reading. So that's a very quick summary that kind of brought me to this point. Yeah. So, and I guess in regard to my education, I should also note that I'm a doctoral candidate at Northeastern University in the Curriculum and Leadership program. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lyons. Okay, so we're just going to proceed for the school committee's own purposes. Just write down the list that we have here. So we'll start with Ms. Morgan and see if she has a question.
Great, thank you. Doug, could you please tell us about a time in your professional career in a leadership role when you were given new information that affected a decision you had already made, and how did you proceed?
Sure. So when I was working in Chelsea, I was in charge of the math science curriculum, and I worked really hard, and we did a pilot over a course of a year, and we were moving forward with the pilot, and I think the core of the people I was working with was excited to implement the new curriculum, and kind of in the ninth hour, we had learned that there were new teachers that were going to be using the curriculum, and they hadn't been exposed to it. So, our choice was to move ahead, or to kind of reassess the goals and kind of what we were doing. And what we did is we reassessed and kind of slowed things down. And so the what stayed the same, our endpoint stayed the same. And so, but what we did is we slowed down and to bring teachers up to, or actually more specifically, to meet them where they were, and bring them up to speed and feel comfortable working with the program. That's one example. I think a second example, which we've used just recently, we've done the same thing here in Wakefield, where we were proceeding and working collaboratively with teachers. They've asked, we agree with the what, however, in our new health program in K2, the wellness teachers have asked if we can kind of just recalibrate and kind of work on the schedule and work on the pilot over the course of a year and get some differentiated professional development. And we did. And I would argue it was much more successful. And I think the teachers and the work they're doing now is really incredible because they have had a voice and ownership in the process. So those are two examples, Kate.
Great, thank
Sure.
you.
Mr. Markham.
Thank you again. Mr. Lyons, what tools, resources, and data have you used here in Wakefield to ensure continuous improvement? In your role as superintendent, how would you ensure that the process for continuous improvement is implemented across the district and at each school?
So in regard to tools, resources, and data, I think the most critical thing that in starting any initiative or change work or in terms of growing what we're doing, I think, Tom, the most important thing to do is to kind of set some targets, to kind of create a plan and commit it to print. And so, one of the things, for example, that we've done is in modifying and growing our professional development offerings, is we started off in a place where a few years ago, it looked very, I would argue, one-dimensional. And in working with teachers on the professional development task force, what we're able to do is kind of refine the what. And so we worked and we worked on a plan, and it was an iterative process where we brought people into the conversation and we were better able to meet teachers' needs because of it. So if you look at that in a 3-year continuum, so we devised one plan and implemented it. We surveyed teachers and got feedback, so that was the data in our feedback loop. So, and with that feedback data, we adjusted and kind of created some different offerings, which brings us to year 3. So on a continuum, year 1, 2, 3, if you look at what and how we're offering professional development to teachers now, it's markedly different than what we were doing when I first started here. But that plan, the components of that plan and the kind of the goals and the values of that plan are still in place. What's changed is we've differentiated that to better meet the needs of teachers, and we've also kind of devised kind of plans to also meet the regulatory requirements and what teachers will need for teacher certification, their SEI endorsement, as well as their content-based and special education-based professional development. And we're offering that in 18 different ways in this year's plan, whereas 3 years ago, we were offering that in just a few different ways. So that's an example of something that has grown where we've used data. And the feedback loop is always the kind of the surveys and information that we use. We get feedback from teachers, but we also debrief and look deeply at that information with teachers on the PD task force. So that's one example, Tom.
Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
Doug, as a superintendent of the Wakefield Public Schools,
Yeah.
you will engage with a wide range of stakeholders, including employee groups. The Wakefield Public Schools have over 500 employees across 7 different unions, from teachers to administrative staff to custodians, food service workers, and others. How has your experience allowed you to fairly interact with various groups and balance their sometimes competing needs?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I thought so.
You know, it's a complex question. So one of the very positive things that I've been able to do when I first started here was I went through negotiations with all of the collective bargaining units. So I've met the leadership from all of those units. I've worked collaboratively with them. My relationships with them have only grown since that point. And so since that time, I've worked with, I think, stakeholders and representatives from every union on a number of different topics, from scheduling to Title IX and civil rights issues to special education issues. We've worked collaboratively with the union in the Unit A group. And so, you know, one of the things that I realized very quickly is that to be effective in this role, to be effective as superintendent, you have to be able to make relationships and be able to listen and seek to understand their position before moving forward, right? It's not about rushing to get to done. It's being able to work collaboratively and understand that from whatever their perspective is, you know, you have to understand that and seek to kind of work to a middle ground and move forward. Because at the end of the day, with all of these relationships, right, you have to come back and work together the next day, right? And so it's critical to be able to be in the types of not only relationships, but the types of experiences where sometimes are very challenging, but you need to be able to kind of manage that and work through it. Because at the end of the day, our job is to come back to school the following day and do a great job for kids. And I think by and large, I've been able to do that. And I didn't do it single-handedly. I would say that all of the kind of the people in those positions have really been remarkable and so very supportive of central office, of Dr. Smith, and of myself. So that's
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Massey.
Doug, as far as faculty, staff, and student relations, I think one of the strengths of Dr. Smith's administration is making every effort to maintain high morale.
Yeah.
It's been used to increase productivity and make for an enjoyable experience every single day. What are several examples of actions you have taken in the past to improve staff and student morale, and what would you bring to Wakefield schools to strengthen an already high morale?
Yeah. That's a great question. You know, it makes me think of, you know, the professional culture and how positive Dr. Smith is. And I think that that's kind of a hallmark of her work. And I think that that's something that I've learned from her, and I've learned the importance of that. So I would anticipate that very positive outlook, assuming the best of intention, you know, working for the benefit of students and adults is the goal. And I think that I've done that in a number of different experiences in helping teachers with professional development. I've worked collaboratively with our administrators, our assistant principals and directors, facilitating supervision and evaluation professional development. I've worked collaboratively with our curriculum coordinators and our literacy coaches in providing professional development around coaching and instructional leadership and adult learning. And so those are some examples where I've interacted with them. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think there's a genuine, I think one of the things that will continue if I'm superintendent, is that, there's a genuine love for learning on the adult side, and there's a genuine kind of care and respect that I think we have for all of the adults in the district. And we understand that the most important thing that's happening here in the district happens in the classroom. And so I think those values will absolutely continue, RJ.
Thank you.
And I think because of that, I think we will continue to get some really nice results.
Thank you.
Ms. Fortier.
Doug, as the instructional leader of the Wakefield Public Schools, please describe what your process would be for developing and building upon the Wakefield Public Schools instructional strategy.
Yes. And so one of the things that I've done to prepare for this process is I've looked back at kind of the very first copies of our instructional strategy. And if you look at kind of the beginning copies of our instructional strategy, it's the same, but so the structure is the same. But what's different now is that as it's grown and it's kind of taken different forms. What Dr. Smith and myself and the leadership team have been able to do is to make edits and refine what the language means, right? What does, rigorous teaching, rigorous curriculum, individualized student learning, what does that mean? What does that look like? So, when Dr. Reich was here, that looked very different than it does right now, right? And so I'll give you an example. Today, I was facilitating a group of directors and assistant principals, and we were talking about how much things have changed in a very short period of time here in the last 4 or 5 years. One of the things that has changed is that teachers have really become adept at sharing their practice and learning in professional learning communities, right? So their practice has become deprivatized. They're also willing to have and share their practice and allow people to come into their classrooms. And we were talking about this on a continuum where just a short time ago, that was very different than it is now. And because we've developed this professional community, teachers have been able to learn with and from one another with the instructional strategy as a guide in a professional community. So that language isn't radically different than our first iteration that was developed with Dr. Smith and Dr. Reich. But now in practice, so that the practice is really what has been refined. So I think, and what would continue is the instructional strategy would continue, but we would seek to really dig deeper into what those headings mean, right? What does it look like in practice? How are we sharing that? How are we kind of sharing that not only professionally outside of this venue, but how are we coming to school committee and being able to discuss it and talk about it? And I think that we've really made, I would argue, amazing strides in that area. And that's really a credit to the principals, to our literacy coaches, to our curriculum coordinators, and to our central office leadership as well. But I would probably put it in that order. We've really grown tremendously using that as a guide. So I wouldn't anticipate right now that would change radically, but what would change beneath those headers are the practices and kind of the evidence of practice, right? And how it shows up in student work and how it shows up in our professional learning.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Kaliakos.
Thank you. We had a robust conversation about budgeting, so that my question is focused in that area. So hoping you could share your experiences developing, managing, and leading the budget process. Wakefield has enjoyed a healthy period of fiscal growth, which has benefited the school district as well as making much needed improvements in quality teaching and learning.
Mm-hmm.
How would you lead us in planning for leaner times without losing this critical momentum?
Yes, the support of the community has been tremendous, and it is, I believe, the reason why families are moving here. It's why leaders are choosing to come work here in regard to our new principals that we've been able to hire. feel very fortunate to be part of that. And so I am also keenly aware, being involved in the budgeting process and working very closely with Mr. Piffling and Dr. Smith, and also with the finance subcommittee from the school committee and the finance committee people that took part collaboratively in our work this year. And so, it's unique to be able to work collaboratively with members of FinCom to develop school committee budget. I would argue that was a stroke of brilliance, because, the conversations that needed to take place and the understanding that FinCom now has around our budget, I think gives them unique insight and understanding and kind of how the complexity of it, the challenges of it, but they've also been willing to lend their expertise, right, and kind of share with us some questions they have. So, and that's a question that they have as well, Greg, is moving forward, what does budgeting look like? How do we work? The numbers that we have, the support that we have gotten in the last number of years or last 5 years is not sustainable. And I think that that's correct. But if you look a little bit further back, you can see that the corrections that was made 5 years ago was something that was needed. And if you look at kind of the percents over time, things kind of come a little bit more into kind of perspective, and there isn't kind of the cyclical up and down. So I think objectively, we need to kind of work collaboratively, and we need to work innovatively to think how we can continue to support teachers to do their absolute best work and support students to do their best work, and also meet a range of needs, a number of which have been highlighted earlier this evening in our budget conversation. But I think that the focus really needs to be around what practices can stay and what practices, could we look at in regard to how could we look at things differently? How could we look at things creatively? How could we innovate? How can we, what are cost-saving measures? What do they look like in the next 5 years? And I think that that's going to be a challenge, not only for us, but for every school district. But I think that one of the things that I'm excited about in regard to the superintendent position and doing that work are the relationships that we have, not only with school committee, but with the selectmen's committee and finance committee as well. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Kaya, did you have a question tonight? Great.
So the superintendent is the public face of the school department, but doesn't necessarily have much direct engagement with students. What would you do to become better aware of the students' needs as they see them?
yeah. And so one of the biggest changes, Kaya, in going to a central office position from a principal position for me was being away from students and families. It was kind of a difficult adjustment to start. One of the things that I've learned to love about where my office is connected to the high school. And so I feel like I see students and teachers virtually every day. I feel like, there isn't a week that goes by that I'm not in at least 3 elementary schools, and so, or the Early Learning Center. So I think that what's critical in the role of the superintendent and also central office administration across the board, I think it's critical for us to be in schools, seeing not only what's happening and seeing the work of teachers, but hearing from students as well. And so we've had the opportunity to do that a few times in a few different venues this year, to actually meet with students, to talk with them. I've had the pleasure of talking with you, which has been, amazing. It's been instructive. It's really wonderful. So I would hope to only grow that. So, yeah, welcome.
Mr. Lyons, so I have a 2-part question. I hope you don't mind.
No, please.
So here in Wakefield, we strive to let our core values guide all that we do.
Correct.
A commitment to following these is a tool in addressing dilemmas that arise, ethical or otherwise. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your own core values are, and more importantly, how you utilize them to make decisions?
My core values are, a commitment to community, a commitment to kind of personal best, but two important core values for me are really love and care. I feel like it was my role as a teacher to provide love and care for students, but also to provide high expectations. And in regard to my in regard to my core values around creating a community, it was to kind of develop a sense of belonging in a classroom when I was a teacher, develop safe spaces for kids to learn, and to meet them where they are and help them move forward. There was a heavy emphasis on growth, which brings me to the personal best part. One of the things that is, core value is personal best, not only for students, right, which is really represented in growth, right? It's about growing from where you are, not comparing or looking at it from a deficit lens, not looking at it of what you're not, but what are you? What do you bring? And then how do you grow those skills? But I also kind of think about myself in that category as well. How am I learning and growing? How am I adding value to whatever I'm a part of? And how am I getting feedback to check my thinking and my understanding on that? Not just kind of being convinced that, oh yes, things are going great, but how am I really checking that, things are improving and that kind of my leadership and the leadership of the team is making a difference. So that's how kind of I think about kind of the practice of leadership and core values and the intersection of both.
So just to follow up, speaking a little to more of that, so as is the nature of anything with 3,000 students and 500 plus employees, individual core values, beliefs, opinions are going to clash at times. They'll mismatch at times. Can you talk to us a little bit about a situation where you had to mediate between two people who are having a difference of opinion or a difference of belief, and kind of how you handled that?
Yeah. Adults disagree. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's a really challenging thing. But I think in regard to creating a professional environment, an expectation where we come and we make decisions that are good for children, but also good for the professionals, and kind of creating a workspace that is safe and productive. And so, I've worked with adults that have had differences in those areas where I've listened to both parties thoughtfully. I have kind of provided feedback. Sometimes that feedback was welcomed, sometimes maybe less than welcomed. But I feel like, people need the best information or the best feedback that you can provide them to really do their best work. And so it doesn't always make sense to hold back in that area. So, I think one of the things, or the example that I'm thinking of, Rob, is, I've worked with adults to kind of listen to their position, to try to validate their concern, but also to kind of create a constructive kind of conversation about how do we move forward? What are our next steps? Often, adults can look at conversations that are need to be won or lost, which is, really a deficit position. Sometimes that's not the kind of the best way to look at it. So often I'll kind of reflect back different kind of perspectives and say, at the end of the day, we need to make the best decisions that we can. We need to move forward, and we need to kind of not have this impact us in negative ways. And adults, for the most part, absolutely get that, and they work toward that expectation. Yeah. Adults are amazing. They are, and I don't mean that, I mean, sometimes, less flexible than our students. But, I think most adults that are teachers know in their heart, and or that are faculty members, or they're in the bargaining units that work in schools with students, most of them really do amazing work every day. So.
Thank you. Now just jumping back, and Ms. Fortier, I apologize if this was my fault and I skipped over it, but I do see you have a secondary question here. I don't know if you wanted to maybe ask that now?
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So it's in reference to instructional quality, which is what
Yeah.
I was asking before. When you visit a classroom, what are the instructional practices you hope to observe?
Yeah, one of the things that, I do when I go into a class is I look at the students and I look at what they're doing and what learning looks like and feels like. And so, I always love to see students that are able to talk about what they're learning, that are able to talk to one another about what they're learning, that are able to give each other feedback, really nice quality, and we see it often, is when, students can kind of engage one another and help them learn the content. And so, those are things that I look at primarily. I'm always curious about the academic behaviors that are demonstrated, around collaboration, around communication. And I'm curious about the through line. When I do see that, I then kind of, if my first kind of look is at students, my next look is, okay, what is the teacher doing? What is on the board? What does the classroom look like and feel like? And so when I see that happening at a really high level, I'm always curious about what shifts or what moves the teacher has done in regard to their not only their lesson planning, but the execution of their lesson to create that environment for kids to kind of work at that level. So those are the things that I primarily look at.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Markham, I'll turn it back over to you for this little brief portion at the end here.
Thank you. Mr. Lyons, thank you for sharing with us this evening. As we draw to a close, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share any closing thoughts to ensure that we have a full appreciation for your candidacy and that we have a full understanding of the types of things that you would like to bring to Wakefield Superintendent.
Yes. First, I'd like to say, again, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be in the mix here. I feel like, I have a lot to offer in regard to leadership and continuity and continuing a lot of what we've started here. And so I'm excited to be able to lead that work. And I'm excited to be able to kind of grow the relationships that I've started as well, to bring other people into this work too. And so I feel like this is a unique opportunity for me, and I'm really excited about it. I think, I think it's great. I think the district is really well situated. It's grown tremendously, and so I just feel like the district, are right where we need to be right now. But we're also at a point where we need to start to refine some of our practices and refine some of our goals, and kind of think about what the next 5 years could look like. And I think, to be honest, I can lead that work. I feel like it's based on my experience as a school principal, based on my experience now as an assistant superintendent. I really think I can thoughtfully lead that work. And so I feel like I'm repeating myself, so you have to excuse me. But I think that's really it. I don't have any questions at this point. I know it's going to be a long meeting for you, but thank you for your time. So,
Thank you, Mr. Lyons.
thanks. Appreciate it, Bob.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we do have some time before our next interview begins, so I will just ask, if there's no discussion, I suspect that there's not, if there's a motion to recess until 7 o'clock for our next candidate's interview.
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Good evening and welcome back to the school committee meeting of Tuesday, April 10th, 2018. We'll call this meeting back to order. We're joined now by our superintendent candidate, Susan Kostka. Am I saying that right? Great. Thank you. Okay, so with that, Mr. Markham, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Susan, welcome. Well, welcome back to Wakefield, and thank you for being with us tonight. Could you bring your resume to life for us by telling us about your education, your background, experiences, as well as the professional goal that brings you here to your interest in being Wakefield's next superintendent.
Sure. So as you can see from my resume, this is my 24th year in education, and I'm still incredibly passionate about working with children. I view my role a little bit differently now because now I feel like I'm more of a mentor to the adults in the district and supporting teachers and staff to help them support students better. If you look back over my resume, again, I have years in elementary as a teacher. I have a number of years as a special educator at the middle school level. I was a building administrator and then went on to be a district coordinator for curriculum and professional development. Prior to my role, currently, the last 5 years, I've been assistant superintendent for administration and personnel in Weymouth. The experiences I've had have made me incredibly well-rounded. Typically, you don't find an assistant superintendent that has such a depth of experience with the personnel side. In my previous district in Hanover, I had the superintendent handled a lot of the duties that I handle in my current district. I have strong relationships working with collective bargaining. I negotiate all the contracts. I handle a lot of the operations for multiple departments. I handle a lot of times the transportation department, our technology department, coordinative health services and all the nursing staff, I'm sorry, I think I said transportation already. And it varies from year to year, but I have a lot of the background with the operational sides of the district. I've been able to successfully negotiate all 7 contracts as the only district leader on all the teams in a facilitative role without having to have legal representation, really trying to work in a collaborative style with all of our staff and negotiate successful contracts. And, again, it's just given me an opportunity to really expand my horizon, develop my capacity as a leader, and I'm incredibly ready to take this next role on as a superintendent. I'm excited for the opportunity. I really, one of the things I may have mentioned when I first met with some of the team here is that I didn't push too hard to become a superintendent prior to this year. Last year, I wanted to finish my dissertation and my doctoral program. I did that over a 3-year time period from January 2014 through February 2017, and that was a huge goal for me to handle that next opportunity and really, become Dr. Kuska. So once I've achieved that goal, I'm ready and grounded and ready to hit the road running. I don't think you'll find me with any gaps in my background. Certainly, there are always opportunities where you'll find yourself that you have more strength in one area than others, and I would want to make sure I have a strong staff around me that I could delegate important responsibilities to and to rely on the expertise in the district that you already have. So, again, you can't be great at everything, but I do feel that my vast experience and the depth and breadth of it has really prepared me well for this opportunity, and I'm hoping you'll give me the opportunity to get to know the town better and move forward after tonight.
So, Doctor, just to give you an idea of how it's going to work, we're going to go kind of round robin style with each school committee member asking questions, and we'll start here with Ms. Morgan.
Okay.
Dr. Kuska, could you tell us about a time in your professional career where you were in a leadership role when you were given new information that affected a decision you had already made and how you proceeded?
Well, there was one situation when I was new to the district that I'm currently in, and I just noticed we had some attendance concerns in some pockets, and at the time, I thought it was just a very simple thing to send out a memo to staff saying, this is your attendance for the year, please let us know if it's accurate. We have to report attendance to DESE. In my previous districts, when I was a teacher as well as an administrator, every year you got your updated attendance and how many days you had and so forth. So I didn't think too much about that as far as it seemed like a natural thing to just report that out to staff. But the staff had never had that reported to them, interestingly enough. And when the memo went out, which I considered a very simple memo, just part of my role as personnel, there were some people that felt very threatened by that because it seemed like a very change in why were we doing this? Why is personnel looking into this? Am I looking at all of their absences? And with almost 1,400 staff in the district, I can assure you that in the district, I can assure you that I wouldn't have the opportunity to look that in depth. But certainly, my passion for doing what's best for children does make me want to make sure that our staff try to stay healthy, both mentally and physically, so that they can be there for our students. Because certainly, the more our staff are consistent with students and have consistent expectations for them, it's better for the district overall. So that was, obviously a concern. I wanted to make sure that it could help improve attendance. But at the time, it became a little bit contentious, and staff were not happy. And what I did is, once I realized that it was not as simple as I thought, I made myself available immediately, and I set up 2 different times to have open forums for staff to come and talk to me, find out what was my rationale for doing it. It wasn't to go after anyone. It was truly really about trying to have clean data and again, ultimately do what's best for children. Moving forward because of that decision with that new change and getting to know the district each year since I've done that, I've made sure that I proactively have reached out to our union leaderships and just said, just letting you know, this is coming out, this is why it's coming out, not just with that type of a memo, but just in general, trying to make sure I catch things on the proactive front end versus reactively trying to deal with something afterwards. And I've been able to establish very strong relationships with all of our union presidents and being able to be proactive in many cases in that respect and not have to react and have to backpedal like I did in that particular situation. But again, that comes with experience and time, and I'm sure there'll be some mistakes I make here and learn from those, and I think there are always opportunities for growth.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Markham.
Thank you. What tools, resources, and data have you used in your district to ensure continuous improvement? In your role as superintendent, how would you ensure that your process for continuous improvement is implemented at the district and each school level?
I mean, we know that we're a data-driven country in general, and Massachusetts has high standards for stakeholders for testing, so clearly we do have to look at data. I do consider myself very well data-informed, and when I do make decisions, I want to have data to support those decisions. But I don't think data tells the whole story. I think you need also anecdotal information about students and staff and other pieces to kind of just get the full picture before you make your decisions. I do ask, when staff, for example, if a principal is requesting more staff based on just things that they want in their budget for the following year, certainly there's a conversation that data has to be part of that decision-making. I would want them to bring the numbers, the reasons, the rationale. So definitely data informed, and definitely I think that's an area where we know that as Wakefield or any district, we have to look into that. I have a lot of experience working with Dibble's data, iReady, Pearson data, certainly, a lot of the testing that other districts have used. I'm not one to say that there's one particular data source we should be looking at. I think we should look at multiple pieces of data, again, to kind of get the whole picture. And something I talked about to the parents when I met with them the other night, I think we also need to be looking at the data of when our students are going out of the district and moving on to college or higher education or military or careers. What is happening with them 5 years out from graduating from high school? What's happening 10 years out? Do we look at that data in the district? We have EWIS data that we can look at, but we also have, longitudinal data and trying to see. We're graduating the kids from Wakefield very successfully, and you have very high success rates going to college, but are they successfully getting out of college? Are they getting careers? That's some of the data I'd want to look at with the district and see what's our long-range plan for ensuring the most success for all of our students in the global world.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Callanan.
Thank you. I'll be riding through your neck of the woods in a few weeks. I do the Best Buddies Challenge.
Oh, that's a great one, yes.
My topic is on communication and collaboration. As superintendent of the Wakefield Public Schools, you would engage with a really wide range of stakeholders, including employee groups. The Wakefield Public Schools have over 500 employees across 7 different unions, from teachers to administrators to custodians to kitchen staff and the like. How has your experience allowed you to fairly interact with the various groups and balance their sometimes competing needs?
That's a fair question. Certainly, again, I've navigated that very strongly just in my role because I have the opportunity when I meet monthly with our WEA, which is our teachers union, our paraprofessionals, and our Unit B members, which are our deans, assistant principals, and so forth. So monthly meetings with that group has been very helpful because I am able to, again, as I mentioned earlier, be proactive versus reactive. We've gotten to a point that I've built strong, trusting relationships with all of the union leaders and been transparent and consistent with my expectations. There have been times when some have maybe said to me, we don't always agree with you, but we do respect your decisions and we do trust that you're being fair to us and consistent. And that speaks very highly for the time I've taken to build trusting relationships with all of the members. And, if I look at the competing differences with all the unions, I do think that's true. But I also, ultimately, it always has to go back to, we're all here because we care about kids. And that's often the, you'll hear me say that often when I have to make a difficult decision, whether it's with teachers or whether it's with paraprofessionals, with our custodians. My first thing is, how does this impact children? What's best for them? And then, secondly, I do look at the staff and how is it going to, we don't want things to negatively impact staff, and we're all in this business, I hope, for the right reasons. I know that's why I'm here today. I wouldn't be in this role or looking towards this role as superintendent if I didn't care passionately about doing what's best for children. So are there going to be times when different union leaders have different perspectives and everybody's looking for different pieces of the pie, if you will? But at the same token, it's all Wakefield, and we all are trying to do what's best for the town as a whole. Certainly as a superintendent, I'd be advocating strongly for our schools and increasing the budget and increasing the needs of the schools. But that being said, I pride myself on having strong relationship with our town leaders as well, whether it's currently in Weymouth, the chief of police, the fire chief, the DPW head. We're all working collaboratively together, and I have very good relationships with them as well. And I think that's important to make sure, in addition to working well with all of the staff, also making sure that I'm reaching out and being collaborative with all the community stakeholders that are necessary to run the whole school system. I don't ever want to get that contentious, us and them mentality. I've seen that before, and it's not best for the schools, and it's not best for the town if we start to get our hackles up, I guess, if you will, in disagreeing on topics. So I do feel that you'll find my nature is very collaborative, and I do have strong communication skills, and I'm able to work through problems and problem solve with the teams, whether it's the union teams, whether it's the community teams, parents, and stakeholders that have to make decisions for the school district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Massey.
Dr. Guska,
Hi.
as far as faculty, staff, and student relations, one of the strengths of Dr. Smith's administration is making every effort to maintain high morale. It has been used to increase productivity and make for an enjoyable experience every day. What are several examples of actions you have taken in the past to improve staff and student morale, and what would you bring to Wakefield to strengthen high morale?
One of the things that I've tried very consistently is to get out in the buildings on a regular basis. Now, being that my role is the personnel role, it's a little unique that way. When I was in more of a curriculum leadership role and the educational leadership piece, I was working hand in hand with the staff. I was helping develop curriculum and professional development, so I was visibly, face to face with the staff, interacting that way. My role is a little different in that respect, so because of that, I've made the extra effort to make sure that I build a 3-week rotation, and I try to get into 4 buildings. So one day a week, I'll put myself in schedule that every 3 weeks I've covered all 12 buildings. And I walk through the classes. I'm very, very visible, interacting with all the staff. What I found is that by being out and about on a regular basis, it's really not only helped my interactions with the staff, but also with our administrators. We certainly have, I'm sure as you do here, we'll have central leadership meetings, we have academic leadership meetings with our principals and so forth on a regular basis. But I find a lot of the times when I go to visit the schools and I go into the classrooms to visit, I try to leave a little block of time for each principal as well, because typically when I'm coming just unannounced on a visit, they always want to grab me and chat, because there's things that are probably in the back of their mind, and they, trying to get around to making that phone call or sending an email to me. And by me being visible every 3rd week in their building, they have a chance to get my one-to-one attention. And I really feel that that's really behooved me well to take the time to build those relationships with the principals and with all the staff. Certainly in the larger buildings, it's harder to get through. I currently have a high school with about 1,800 students. It's about a quarter-mile long. So I find that's always a challenge, because I want to get to know the high school staff as equally as I do the primary staff. When I go into a building where there's 254 students and, a small number of staff, I do know them very, face-to-face. I know things about their families, but the larger buildings, it just takes a lot of time to get through those. So that's probably an area I would want to work on more, to make sure that I give an equitable amount of time to all levels, whether it's primary, middle school, or high school, and really try to. So I think even though I've developed a strong process for making sure I'm visible and about in all of the buildings, knowing the size of the different buildings, I want to make sure that I probably put a larger amount of time at the larger buildings, because the smaller buildings are easy to get through. When I was in them the other day, clearly it's similar to where I am, and you get to know those staff in the smaller buildings a little better that time. In addition, I'd want to make sure I have FaceTime just with staff to meet after school, open forums periodically. That would be my first year entry plan, is to try to develop some meeting times when I have times that I can be available for parents, times that I can be available for administrators, times that I can be available for the staff, and hope that they would take the time to meet with me, after school or before school for coffee hours and things like that. Thank you. You're welcome.
Ms. Fortier.
Hi, Dr. Pesca. As the instructional leader of the Wakefield Public Schools, please describe what your process would be for developing and building upon the Wakefield Public Schools instructional strategy.
I do like, one of the things I had noted previously is when I looked at your mission and vision statements, I liked the fact that you made a separate effort to look at the emotional and safety needs of students. We did embed that in my current district. We embedded the social and emotional well-being of students into the mission and vision statement, so it's definitely there and front and center. But I like that you have them kind of separate so that it's very clear that we have to focus on both, because if you can't have strong social emotional supports for students in place, you're not going to get to the academic improvement that you're talking about and looking for. What I'd like to see is how you've combined those and embedded those, because it's not as clear for me to see how you kind of made them live and move in the same direction together to enhance the needs of all students in the district. I've done a lot of work around the social emotional needs of students, and just looking at public safety and just all the things our students are faced with and our staff are faced with. I think that's going to be a critical piece no matter coming to Wakefield. I think all districts are facing it, and making sure that I have a good handle on what supports we can put in place to have our trauma-sensitive students moving in the right direction, looking at adjustment counselors and what you've embedded throughout the structures of your schools. We've used a model in my current district that we've had PBS and PBIS, positive behavioral intervention systems, from pre-K to 12 now, and it definitely enhances the students have this positive system in place. That being said, that's really a tier 1 intervention, so I'd want to see what kind of things we have in place or what I could build upon to make sure we have a tier 2 and a tier 3 intervention system. And that wouldn't be just for the social emotional learning, but also for the academic needs of students. So again, looking further into the social emotional and the two vision and mission statements that you have overarching, how do they connect? What's working well with those, and then how do we embed that in our daily practices throughout the pre-K through 12 environment so that students are looking for college and career success as they start in their preschool and head all the way through high school and beyond, as I talked about earlier.
I have a follow-up.
Sure.
When you visit a classroom, what are the instructional practices you hope to observe?
Certainly engagement's important, but I've been in classes where there's high engagement but not rigor. So I would want to see if that combination is there. What are the rigorous things related to the student objectives? Do the students know what their learning outcomes are? I like to be able to walk up to the students and ask, what are you learning today and why? And when they can tell me that and very strongly speak to that, that's usually a good sign. Again, I have been in situations where kids are very enthusiastic, it's very hands-on, there's a lot of energy in the class, but then when I start looking into the objectives and what they're learning for the day, it's not always rigorous. So really trying to make sure that they're both very strongly embedded in the classroom. And you definitely can walk in a classroom and really immediately get a sense of the engagement. I think that's very clear. You can also have a class that has low engagement but high rigor. So where do we get that balance, and how do we help teachers incorporate the two of them? And I think that's quite a dance. Having been a teacher for 15 years myself, walk the walk and talk the talk, but doing that dance on a daily basis and keeping those two overarching needs of having strong expectations for our students, the rigor on a daily basis, but also keeping students engaged so that they're not bored with it. I have seen that we've had teachers that, again, going back to engagement, they may not have, you walk in the class and it seems very quiet and subdued and they're not doing a lot of the hands-on activities, but some of those teachers have really strong academic outcomes and rigorous classes, and their data supports that they're moving the kids in the right direction. So it's not always about looking for one or the other. It's really a balance of each. And there might be days that a teacher might have a very subdued lesson and the next day has a very hands-on, enthusiastic lesson for students. So wanting to get in there on a regular basis and support the principals with that and making sure that they know how to look for that. We've done this as a district through our learning walks. We typically go into the buildings as a district group and support our teachers, and we have teachers and principals on the teams with us, and going through the classrooms, looking for common themes about how we can support each school and help them grow to their best ability. And I would love to continue that. I think I talked with people here the other day that you do have a similar model in place. We want to continue that and expand upon it, but really helping people understand what does rigor look like on a daily basis, and what does it not look like as well, and kind of tease that out with the staff. You're welcome.
Ms. Liakos.
Thanks. Add my thanks to you for participating in the process and spending time with us here tonight. So earlier tonight, we debated and voted on our forthcoming fiscal year's budget. So my question is going to be hoping to give you a chance to share your experiences developing, managing, and leading budget process, and just a little background. So Wakefield has enjoyed a healthy period of fiscal growth, which has benefited the school district, as well as making much-needed improvements in quality teaching and learning. How would you lead us in planning for leaner times without losing this critical momentum?
Yes, and I did look at, obviously, looking at the data on that, and I see that currently it only shows up your 2015 net school spending, but I think at that point you were at 128%, which is pretty good. A lot of districts strive for that. In Weymouth, we're not there. We've really struggled with that, trying to build back. Intense amount of budget cuts in 2008, long before I came to the district, and we've still been continuing to try to build that back little by little. So it seems like you've made great gains in Wakefield in building back, and that was some of the conversations I had with your central leadership. So I'm excited about that you have built up, some of those director positions, and have support staff in place that can do a lot of the work with curriculum development and professional development, which is very critical. And I do think there's always going to be bubbles of time when things, ebb and flow and the budgets aren't there, and we have to deal with that as administrators, and always being proactive and trying to plan ahead and look ahead as to where those things are coming from. I have sat on the budget subcommittee for a number of years in my current role. We meet as a team, or we start the process typically in October. We meet with each principal either face-to-face, or they call in and we go over their budget line item by line item together. And being personnel, typically they'll say that I have the largest amount of the budget, about 85% or so, which we know that personnel takes up most of the budget in a district. And I really don't have any line items for anything else, because I do oversee personnel, even to the point that I do a lot of work with, one of my roles is safety and security, and I've been really working hard to make sure all of our schools have built up their safety, the school entrances and the trainings we've done with staff. I've done a lot of work with that, but I haven't had a line item for that. So I would want to make sure that with my strong understanding of the budget and how it operates, that those pieces are all in place. For example, the safety and security, a lot of times will fall under capital, and there have been other improvements that we've had, in Weymouth, that the capital plan has moved forward from year to year, and some of the same things like school furniture and sometimes just curriculum changes if you're trying to purchase a new, whether it's an online tool for a particular subject area. And when that stays in the capital plan, if it's not getting funded, those needs often continue to go unmet. So I'd want to look not only at your current budget, but also the capital plan and the sustainability of that. And that, I'd probably want to go back 10 years and kind of see what's been funded through that venue as well. I certainly feel very confident in managing the budget. The budget here is smaller than the one that I manage with my superintendent now, so I don't feel that I have any concerns with that. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I have a strong oversight with different operational pieces of the school department, such as food services. When I came to the district, the food services department was continually in the red, and I looked into staffing in that area because we wanted to continue to employ our own staff. I think it's better for students if we have community members and stay in our schools. At the time, the business manager had talked about potentially outsourcing the food services department, and I was concerned about that, again, thinking it's best for, particularly when you're trying to do PBIS school-wide, to have your staff that are that work directly for the school system. But I looked very creatively at all of the staffing in the program, and what I found out when we had a new leader in place in that department, we were able to dissect that we really were overstaffed, and that was one of the huge reasons for being in the red for a number of years and supplementing from the school budget, which was not a good idea. And at that time, when I made some recommendations, since then we've been able to keep that department in the black. But it's also about the way I'm able to make those decisions and continue to move forward it's because I also have strong relationships with the union members. So in that particular case, when I had to make recommendations for a staffing decrease, a number of FTE decrease in that department, I met directly with the union. We problem solved together, and their SEIU representative as well. And they wanted to maintain their jobs, so we worked together, we made good decisions, and the department has been very viable ever since. So I know that's a little bit off of what you're talking about. I just want to give you an example of how my strong sense of the budget in multiple departments has been able to make me a little bit visionary in problem solving when we do have deficits in the district.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Kaya is our school committee student representative, so she has a question for you tonight.
Hi, Kai.
So, obviously, the superintendent is the public face of the school department, but doesn't necessarily have often like interactions and engagements with students. So, what would you do to become better aware of the needs of students as they see them?
Well, I hope I'll have opportunities to really meet with our student leadership forums too. I mean, again, wanting to get to know what type of offerings you have at the high school, after school enrichment opportunities and so forth. But I would want to make sure that I do get opportunities to engage with the students. Certainly when I'm visiting the high school, floating in and out of the classrooms, I have I'm very comfortable walking up to students, as I mentioned earlier, walking into a classroom and asking the students, what are you working on, what are you learning today, and having those candid conversations. And I think, I don't know if your school committee has a student advisory that meets on a regular basis and presents, so that would be another area to want to get to know the students through that group. But usually, typically, you get an opportunity to meet a lot of the students that are high achievers and our students that are into sports and, a lot of the highly successful students. But I'd want to make sure I get an opportunity to meet various groups in the school department and different students that have, get the student voice. What do you feel is important for Wakefield? What are you looking to your future here as a student? And I would want to make sure I build those opportunities so that if there are events going on at the high school, that I try to get out and about to them as much as possible. But knowing that, emergencies do happen and you have to reschedule, I feel like if I built enough of my schedule, typically I start the year by planning out the whole year of if I, as I mentioned earlier, if I'm planning on being at the high school, let's say every second or third week, I would want to make sure that I build that out for the entire year so that there might be a time that comes up that I don't get there, but then I know on the next rotation I would get there and make sure I'm out visiting with students. And obviously, career events, nighttime activities, college nights and things like that, I would certainly want to make sure I'm visible to those types of things as well. Drama events, we all know, those are the fun events to go to. Music. I had, my own children were very involved in drama and music at the high school, so I think the theater arts here, and I saw your, the center that you have at the high school is wonderful, so I want to get to see that a little bit more as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Doctor, here in Wakefield, we strive to let our shared values guide everything that we do. Our core values. A commitment to following our core values can be a strong tool in addressing dilemmas that arise, as they always do, ethical or otherwise. Can you talk to us briefly about your own core values and more importantly, how you utilize your core values to help you make decisions?
Well, I do oversee ethics for the school department as well, and it's my role to ensure that our staff are doing all of their mandated trainings, making sure that they're all evaluated properly, and that they're doing their ethics training every 2 years. I have a strong moral compass. You'll find that I am incredibly passionate about making sure that we do what's best for children, as I mentioned earlier, and to do that, we all have to have a high standard of expectations. You'll find that the expectations I have for myself are incredibly high, and I have high expectations for staff as well. I'm very grounded. I practice what I preach, so I won't be expecting anything from staff that I wouldn't do myself or submit myself to. And I'm consistent. I think that, I mentioned that earlier, that that's something that if you talk, out of my 12 principles, I think if you asked any one of them, similar to what I said with staff, there are times when people might not be happy with decisions because everybody has a different impact. You try to do what's best for the majority and do what's best for children first, but not everybody's going to agree with every decision I make. I would want to make sure I vet those decisions and make sure I get the input from stakeholders before making it, but at some point I do have to make a difficult decision that maybe isn't favorable to everyone. But I will say the one thing that I pride myself, well, I shouldn't say the one thing, but something I do pride myself on is that consistency. I've had more than one administrator and more than one staff member say to me, they will always know what to expect from me. I'm fair and consistent and transparent. I won't waffle. I don't play favoritism. I think that's a critical role, that you know what to expect from me, no matter what I think of a person or what I think, or what my relationship might be with them, because we all have different people that we might get along with better than others. But the decision I make is going to be what's best for children and what's fair and equitable. I have seen people that lead by micromanaging staff and are very strong-willed, and I don't think that's best. I think it's best if we can work collaboratively together, that we can communicate on a regular basis. And I think the same as I mentioned with staff, if you talk to my 7 union president, well, I have 5 union presidents because 3 of them are under one. And I think if you asked any one of those presidents, they say the same thing, that they know what to expect from me, that I've been fair and transparent, and that I have made great progress in the district because I listen. I take the time to reflect on my decision-making before I make a decision, and it's served me very well. I do find that 9 times out of 10, I know what's going to happen before it does happen in the district, because I'm apt to get a phone call to say, this is what's going on, how can we work together to solve this, versus a grievance coming up to me at level 2. I'd rather not have to deal with a grievance. I think we can usually work things out in a positive way and a collaborative way, and I pride myself by moving in that direction. And I think I talked to it the other day when I was here. When I first started in the district, we did have a lot of grievances. The teachers' union had just gone through they had a new contract in place that had not ratified. So I spent my first few weeks in the district making sure we did the contract negotiations again, and we did get it to ratify upon the start. But that left a lot of tension, because prior to me coming, there was, it was a tense process. It got to be a little contentious from what I understand, and that's not really how I operate. So I've really worked hard in the last 5 years to develop those relationships, to build the trust, to be consistent and fair, and to let the staff see me in that manner and know that I'm not going to, if I make a mistake, I'll own it. I certainly won't blame others for it. I'll take the heat for that. But at the same token, if I do make a mistake, I'm hoping that staff have learned that they can trust me and know that I'll rectify that as well.
So just as a follow-up, and you touched upon it a little bit, as is the case in any district, in Wakefield, one with 3,000 plus students, 500 plus employees, there are going to be times when individual core values, beliefs, opinions clash or are mismatched. Can you share with us a situation where you had to mediate between different parties who had that sort of mismatch or difference of opinion, and how did you handle it?
I'm sure I think of a specific example. I mean, certainly, as I mentioned, in grievances, that when I came to district, one of my roles is to oversee and hear the level 2 grievance in the district. So typically, they've already had their level 1 with the administrator building level or department supervisor, and then here I am. I came into the district after in multiple years in education and never having heard a grievance, but also never having been part of a grievance as an educator as well. And here I am now taking on that role for the district. So that came with a lot of listening and problem solving. It is very hard in that role sometimes, because you need to hear both sides. In that role, I'm an administrator, and I certainly need to do what's best for the district in that respect. But there are 2 sides to every story. I need to make sure I listen to the building administrator that is involved in the grievance. I need to make sure I hear from whether it's a teachers or if it's the food services department, whatever department that is. And then it's my job to kind of facilitate that process and correct it. Was there something that really was a violation of the contract? Then certainly we have to own that as a district, and we have to rectify that. But most of the time I found through my experience that there really have not been very many contractual violations. It's typically a perception, and then sometimes it's my job to make sure I facilitate the process of understanding how the 2 different sides have that perception, and how can we adapt that and make sure we can modify that to learn from each other and improve the conversation and improve our collective discussion together. Because what I find is sometimes it's just having someone that in my role trying to be very neutral and hear both sides of both parties, and then hoping to facilitate the communication so we can get back to a better place. So I don't know that I answered exactly what you were looking for, but that's very important to me, to try to really make sure that we communicate effectively and avoid some of the negativity that can come from tension in the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and we'll bookend with Mr. Markham again.
Thank you. At this time, as we wind down this evening's conversation, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share any closing thoughts and make sure you have a final chance to impart upon us a full appreciation of your candidacy and what you would bring to Wakefield.
Certainly. And, and when I started out, we talked about the fact that I have 24 years in education. But I think if you look at my background compared to most people in a similar role, there are very few people that have gone through the full capacity of the role. I mentioned in my previous role as a director of teaching and learning K-8, I was actually K-12 for curriculum work and professional development. And there was not an assistant superintendent in the district at the time, so I was the district person handling all of those things. Moving into the personnel side, that's been very eye-opening. Having 2 assistant superintendents in my current role is unusual. We didn't have a lot of the mid-level supports that we've needed and trying to build back some of that. So I've worn a ton of hats. I mentioned early safety and security. I oversee that, and I oversee family engagement. I've run a district-wide pre-K to 12 family engagement team for the last 4 years. I plan district-wide events. Currently, we have schools that have very different socioeconomics in the district and also very cultural differences as well, and try to make sure that we're being equitable for students has been very important to me. And I take the role of family engagement incredibly important, even though it's really not part of my job description. I've taken on a lot of things in district. As I mentioned, when you have positions that are absent and haven't been filled for a long time, you have to build capacity and try to distribute leadership. I've done that when possible, but I've been one to take on and fill the gaps when we have not had the people to fill the roles. That being said, it's really made me have a very broad understanding of how all of the important pieces that go into being the leader of the district. As I mentioned earlier, I can't think of an area where I really feel I have a strong weakness in, because I've had the personnel side. I meet one-to-one with every single teacher that comes through our doors for a teacher hire. That didn't happen when I first came to the district, but I wanted to make sure that the principals obviously have the chance, at site-based leadership, they certainly get a chance to meet with the candidates for teachers and other staff in the building. But then I like to meet with them myself to put my final stamp on that. What do we expect from them at the district level? What do I, as a superintendent, want for all of our staff? Really, having high expectations for Wakefield and making sure that before they even enter the district, they know what to expect and what we want. As I mentioned, that rigor, how do we instill that in our staff and students? So putting some of those pieces in place, I've already done a lot of the work of a superintendent, and I'm not afraid to take on the challenge. I'm very excited about it. I can't think of anything that you'll regret, honestly. As I mentioned, I practice what I preach. I work very hard. I put in a lot of hours. You can reach me at any time. My husband may not always like it, but I'm available weekends, evenings. So I certainly wouldn't expect any more from the staff than I would from myself, and certainly a lot more from myself than even the staff, because I think that's important, that I take what I do very seriously, and I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't willing to give my best and every ounce to Wakefield. It's a great district. Obviously, there's always things that we can grow in, and I certainly would support that growth. I think the nice thing, too, is coming in as someone from outside of the district sometimes, having a different perspective, and sometimes looking at things that have been done, maybe they've been done a certain way for 25 years, and when you think back and start asking questions, nobody can remember why they came to be that way. Coming in and just asking those questions, that's something I did in my current role when I first came to the district. As I mentioned, negotiating contracts, I started asking, why is it this way? Why do we have that language? Where did that come from? And getting some of the historical understanding of that is very important as I enter the district. But that being said, just because something's been done a certain way for 25, 30 years doesn't mean it's the best way or the right way. And maybe there's some ideas that I'll come in with. I certainly am very creative and passionate, as I mentioned earlier, and I would take the time. I'm not one to make a rash decision and make global changes, but if there are things that I can recommend and work with the team, particularly during the retreat in the summertime with the leadership team, to find out areas that they already have identified as a district, as a leadership team, that they already want to work on as a team, and bring my flair to that. I really do believe I have some great ideas. I'm visionary, and I'm excited to take the opportunity and work with you and hopefully have a long-term relationship here in Wakefield.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Kuska, on behalf of the school committee, thank you for applying for this position. Thank you for spending this evening with us answering our questions.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
It was very nice
Thank
seeing you
you.
all.
Thank you.
I enjoyed my visits here.
Thank you. Okay, and can I have a motion to recess until 8 p.m., please?
So moved.
Made and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Good evening and welcome back to the Wakefield School Committee meeting of Tuesday, April 10th, 2018. We will call this meeting back to order. We are joined tonight by our Superintendent Candidate Jared Fulgoni. Great welcome, sir. Thank you for coming. With that, I will turn it right over to Mr. Markham.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Jared. Welcome back to Wakefield.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
First question is a bit of an introduction and opening. Could you bring your resume to life by telling us about your education, background, experience,
Absolutely.
as well as the professional goal that brings you here in your interest in being Wakefield's next superintendent?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So if I stop and think about it, I think I'm headed into, I think we're approaching now 30 years in education. And as my kids would like to remind me of that I had more hair here and didn't have any here. But I always appreciate them pointing that out. But it's been close to 30 years, and I think I started years ago at the small school, the Crotchet Mountain School in New Hampshire. Was there for a number of years, and then went up to Moulton Borough Academy, where I had an opportunity to work there, to teach. Was a guidance counselor in the middle schools, worked in the high school up there as well. And then for the past 20 years, I've been working in administration as a school leader. Been in small rural schools. I've been in large urban districts. I've been in suburban districts. I've been in affluent districts. I've been in districts with a high poverty rate. Been an elementary principal, middle schools, K to 8s. I've been a district administrator, special education director. And in walking the miles in all those shoes, there's a number of things that I've learned. I've really learned the power of being a strong collaborative leader, building strong positive relationships with all the stakeholders, and creating a culture and climate in the schools where people felt safe to take positive risks, the teachers as well as the students. I really found that if you can build that culture in schools where commitment is more powerful than compliance, then what you start to see is significant gains in achievement. You start to see people that are committed to a core set of values. You start to see people that are inspired to take risks and achieve. And you start to see the whole community really rise. I think there's tremendous potential here in the Wakefield schools. I continue to be impressed by the culture that's being created. I get excited when I talk to people, and people have reached out to me in the community and talked to me about what's going on in Wakefield. And I think Wakefield is really ready to take some of those next steps. There's tremendous momentum. There's some really good things going on. And in my conversations with people, as I was traveling around the district and as I came down last weekend and visited, and as I talked to friends and folks that live here in Wakefield, what they're really looking for is, I think they're looking for that type of leadership. They're looking for people that are a leader that's going to bring people together, that's going to build really strong, positive relationships, someone that has the experience to be able to begin to take those next steps and help Wakefield really grow as a district, continue to reach those next levels. The reason I come down here is really because of that. There's a number of superintendencies open in the state, but I really feel that my leadership style, specifically that about recognizing that my job really is to inspire, to bring people together, to help people understand what our core values are, and then keep those as a focus, set high standards, but not just setting high standards, but actually holding high standards and helping people achieve that, and creating a culture where we can really see this district grow. So my leadership style and my years of success in doing that, I've been very successful in my career. My schools have seen significant gains in achievement, and I've won awards for doing that in my schools. And I've recognized that that's the power in doing it. The power really in the work is creating that culture where people are excited to come to work, where they're passionate, where they're inspired. And when people come, I can guarantee that we're going to do some really great things here as well, too. So I look forward to doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Fulgoni, just to give you an idea of how it's going to work, we're going to go kind of round robin style tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every school committee member will have a question. We'll start with Ms. Morgan to my left.
Could you please tell us about a time in your professional career where you were in a leadership role and you were given new information that affected a decision that you had already made, and how did you proceed?
Absolutely. Okay. I can give you a real specific example. I think probably many of us that have been in education and been in leadership and administration for a while have seen the pitfalls and the coming and goings of school finances. And some of us probably were around in 2008, 2009 when the Chapter 70 money didn't come through. And many of us in many districts were pink slipping people right around Christmas time. And in fact, in the district I was in, a lot of the pink slips that were going out were literally right before the Christmas break. So when the information came in, and it looked like we weren't going to receive the Chapter 70 funding, we had to make some really significant decisions about what we were going to do as a district. And ultimately, when looking at the budget and the shortfalls of the income from the Chapter 70, what we really discovered that we had no option except that it was going to start to impact personnel. And when you have to make those kinds of decisions, those are really tough. The best thing I could do in that situation was fall back into what our core values were and ensure that the decisions I was making, while they weren't going to be liked, were going to be respected because people could understand the way those decisions were made. So when I had to look at what we were going to do to meet those needs, one of the issues were one of our core values and one of our mission was that we wanted to prepare students for a 21st century. So when it came down, I was looking at what my customer, I certainly wasn't going to cut the technology budget. That was going to fly in the face of that core mission. The other thing was that we really wanted to do is we wanted to prepare students for the world and the global economy that we live in, which means that I wasn't really comfortable in cutting the foreign language program, as many schools were doing, because that also flew in the face of the core values that we had set. What I ended up doing is I ended up cutting home ec. Now, that wasn't a popular thing. People didn't like that. No one liked that decision. But I got really no pushback even from the faculty on it because they understood, they could respect that decision. Because again, when it came time to getting that information, even though it had changed the course of where we had originally started, you always revert to what are those non-negotiable core values that we have as a district, what are those missions, what is our goal, and you make decisions based on those. People won't always like them, but people will respect the decision that you make when you can make them in that vein.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Markham.
What tools, resources, and data have you used in your district to ensure continuous improvement? In your role as superintendent, how would you ensure that your process for continuous improvement is implemented at the district and school by school?
Excellent question. Because that is one of the champions of being a superintendent, is that champion for continuous improvement. One of the things I've been working with Nancy Love's group in Research for Better Teaching, and I'm trained as a trainer for this. And one of the things that we look at, because many districts will claim that they're data-driven, and many districts will claim, and as many teachers, that they spend a lot of time using with data analysis. And I think the reality is many districts suffer from what I like to call data paralysis. They spend a lot of time looking at the numbers, but they don't have a sequential process to go through it to help them use that information to make substantive changes, to actually make improvements in what they're doing. The one thing that I've been doing working with teachers and training them on is what's called a data-driven dialogue, and it's an actual structure that we train teachers in and how to use data. And when we say data, it isn't just numbers. You know, that same structure that I've been training teachers in for years, it can be phys ed teachers looking at how to increase participation. It can be elementary teachers looking at how to increase students' literacy. It can be math teachers using it on a common assessment. But the one thing that we want to do is give teachers a specific structure so that any teacher can then start to use data in a way. So we set those benchmarks, we have assessment strategies to look at them, but we want to make sure that any teacher has the foundational skills to really be able to use data in a meaningful way. So when we have those, put that in place, and done that work with Nancy Love and Research for Better Teaching, we really see a really nice shift in that culture about data use.
Mr. Callahan.
I'm focusing on communication and collaboration.
Yes.
As a superintendent of the Wakefield Public Schools, you'll engage with a wide range of stakeholders, including employee groups and parents, and even within the employee groups, you'll have 500 employees, 7 unions, from teachers to administrators to cafeteria workers. How has your experience allowed you to fairly interact with the various groups and balance their sometimes competing needs?
Absolutely. It's nice to hear. I think we sent out almost 2,200 1040 this past year. I have 9 labor groups. So I'm glad. So I get so excited. Like, ooh, that's exciting. That's the one that. But it's interesting. I meet regularly with those. I oversee all the labor issues in the districts and meet regularly with them, and have a very good working rapport with the presidents of the different labor groups. And sometimes there are different competing needs. And I think that the idea is that when you spend the time building those positive relationships, you start to build trust. So again, even while you may not have agreement, there's at least a respect that helps you then work towards a shared goal. And sometimes that means having uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes it means reaching out beyond the scope of just what you would consider to be the typical stakeholders or the typical means of communication. I'll give you an example of that. A few years back, I came into a district and they were looking to start a building project. And they had great plans, and they had tons of meetings, and they invited people to come into the schools, and they had a parent group, and they just did a huge campaign to really get this building project off the ground. And when it came time for the vote, it got voted down. Time and time again, it got voted down. So, the people that were coming out and voting the project down weren't the ones that were coming into the schools for the meetings. They weren't coming, and holding flyers. They weren't standing on the side of roads. They were people that didn't have a strong connection to the school. But you can see the impact of them, and you can see the power that they had and that they kept voting it down. Well, where'd all those people go Saturday mornings? To the dump. Well, we can't call it the dump anymore. You have to call it the transfer station. So I start going Saturday mornings to the dump, dressed like this. And I know, as crazy as it would sound, but I would go Saturday mornings dressed like this, and I would just help them take the garbage out of their cars and throw it away. And I'd talk to people, and I'd introduce myself, say, hi, Mr. Fulgoni from the schools, and I would just talk to them about it. And Saturday after Saturday, they would see me there at the dump, the crazy guy dressed in the suit, helping them with the garbage. But what it allowed me to do was to get to talking to people that wouldn't normally have a voice and wouldn't actually have an avenue, and they weren't actually interested in coming into the schools to talk. So I was going to where they were. And in speaking with them, and all I asked them to do was just listen, hear me out, and then I invited them. I said, listen, I just want you to come to the schools. And slowly but surely, these folks started coming into the schools, and I would give them a tour, and I'd show them around. And I'd say, geez, this is, they'd be like, oh, that was the old janitor's closet. I'm like, yeah, well, that's where my Title I kids now are being serviced. And by reaching out, and lo and behold, when it came time to get that vote, we got our vote, and we got our building project funded. But it was because I was willing to go out and meet people where they were. It wasn't just enough to just sit and expect people to come to us. So when we're talking about really engaging the stakeholders, we have to kind of have a broader lens of how we do that. And we need to be willing to step out of our comfort zone and step out and really speak to people on their turf, and being able to do that. And when you're able to do that, that's when you can really run that communication stream. The typical ones of just speaking to the PTO or to the CPAC or to the site councils. Those are absolutely valuable and invaluable to do that. But if we really want to engage all the stakeholders, then we have to be able to step outside of our traditional space and our traditional roles and go out and speak to the people where they are. And that's how you really engage the community. Yep.
Mr. Massey.
Jared, as far as faculty, staff, and student relations, one of the strengths of Dr. Smith's administration is making every effort to maintain high morale. It's been used to increase productivity and make for an enjoyable experience every day. What are several examples of actions you have taken in the past to improve staff and student morale, and what would you bring to Wakefield to strengthen high morale?
Okay, that's a great. When I first came into Haverhill, morale was really pretty low. They'd gone through a number of turnovers in administration. The teachers, no sense of trust. There was no sense of teacher engagement. The teachers didn't have a voice. So one of the best things you do in that situation is first listen. People need to be heard, and they need to know that you're going to listen when you're speaking to them. So when I first got there, and the teachers I had an open conversation with the teachers and said, what are the issues going on in the school? It was an underperforming school, very capable and competent teachers, very capable students, but they just lacked leadership, and the teachers were just disenfranchised, so they weren't performing at the level they could. And speaking with the teachers, one of the issues that came up is they said, what we really do is we really need more time. Every teacher will say that, right? They just need more time. They needed time to collaborate. I said, okay. So I said, let me think of how we can do this. So I got together and I said to the teachers, I brought the teacher leadership together. I said, this is what we're going to do. I said, I can't make more time in the day, and I don't have more money to pay you to stay beyond. But this is what I'll do. I will cover all your duties. So the assistant principal and I took all the bus duties. We did the recess duties. We stood out there in the rain with umbrellas, and I stood out there greeting customers, and I took every one of the teachers' duties. And I said, I will do that, take all of your duties, if you guys will agree to meet as a PLC. So the trade-off was I take all the duties and you guys meet. Now, what did that do? What it did is the teachers were allowed to say, you know what, this guy's willing to stand out there in the freezing cold and the rain so that we can meet. They instantly felt like professionals. They felt like here's someone who's listening to us, recognize the issue, and is putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak, and actually went out there and stands there in the rains, covers our duty, does all our duties, where we can are treated like professionals. We can engage in the work. A couple things happened that certainly morale gets boosted, but there's an organic accountability that happens with that, right? I never had to go to a teacher and say, hey, you're late for your PLC. Because we had created a culture where the teachers were saying to one another, hey, this guy's standing on the rain. You better be, you need to be here for this. This is our work. This is our time together. So when you start to build that culture, I mean, the morale comes along. Every time when I go to interview, and I have for years, whether it's for anything, I carry with me a letter. And at one point when I was leaving Triton and I was heading to Haverhill to work with Jim Scully, the teachers, unbeknownst to me, came to me and they presented me with this letter. And they said, Jared, they said, wherever you go in the world, we wrote you a letter. We just want you to know how much we think of you. And every single person, from the lunch lady to the bus driver to the secretary, to every single faculty member signed it. And so I carry it with me just as a reminder of that, of the power of when you treat people well and you build that collaborative spirit in the schools and you inspire and encourage people, how much work can get done. But you really got to put your money where you got to be willing to stand there out there in the rain, in the freezing cold, for the betterment of what's happening inside your school. You can't just talk about it. You need to actually bring it to action. So, you're welcome.
Ms. Fortier.
Hello, Mr.
Hi.
Fulgani. As the instructional leader of the Wakefield Public Schools, please describe what your process would be for developing and building upon the Wakefield Public Schools instructional strategy.
Yep, excellent. I can speak to that. I think that's an issue that I'm facing in my district currently. I think I'd spoken this with some groups during my visit, and I think I'd spoken originally with a group when I came that Saturday morning. One of the issues I was looking at, having been a principal for 17 years, I've gone through evaluating, teachers, a variety of different tools and different measures. But one of the things that I recognized most recently is that we would have teachers that maybe were evaluated by a principal as proficient in one particular school. And as case comes in a larger system, sometimes teachers are transferred. So a teacher's rated as proficient by one principal in this school, and then gets to another school and ends up needs improvement. So that was troubling for me. It was troubling for me. It was troubling for the teacher. It was troubling, of course, for the unions. But what I discovered is that we had a lot of conversations about what good instruction looks like, but we hadn't really done the work to really calibrate that. So what I did is I pulled all the principals and the assistant principals together, and over the course of this year, we've actually been doing the work to calibrate what actually good instruction looks like. We've brought in some outside trainers so that it didn't just seem like it was coming from me, but help facilitate those conversations. We now have a great system where principals and assistant principals are pairing up across the city and doing learning walks. They're going in. We now have involved the teachers, where the teachers are doing some learning walks with one another to help share their practice and help them understand good instruction. We have some mentor teachers. They're doing a fabulous job in providing some of that embedded professional development with it. So it really is a really important work to really make sure that people understand what good quality instruction looks like, but that it's consistent as well too. So it doesn't matter whether you're on one side of the city, whether you're on the other side of the city, whether you're in high school, whether you're in the middle school, that we can guarantee that when you come into a classroom that you're going to be receiving the same high quality instruction regardless of where you are.
Great. I have a follow-up.
Yes.
When you visit a classroom, what are the instructional practices you hope to observe?
Well, when we do our instructional walks, we try to break it down. I ask that the principals not go in and look at everything, that we break it down. And what I ask them to do is sometimes we'll go and I say, I just want you to look for relevance. I want you to make sure that what the teachers and the students are learning has meaning so that the students can connect with it and it has meaning to their lives. So then they'll go in and they'll just look for just relevance. And then we'll have conversations about that afterwards. Other times I'll go in and I'll say, now we just want to go in and we're just going to look for rigor. And we don't just mean difficulty, but we actually mean those higher order thinking so that students it isn't just those basic rote memory, that actually students are getting information and getting instruction that's going to help them interpret, understand, predict, and use that for problem solving. We want to look for engagement. So there's other times we'll go in and say, I want to look for instructional practices that really benefit engagement and really strengthen student engagement with the materials. And we want to really make sure that there's a clear purpose so that the students understand exactly why are we learning this? So that there's relevance to what they're so it's meaningful to them, that it's rigorous, that there's engagement to it. And that each time that we go in, we break it down to another piece of those. And so that we start so that we have a real clear understanding exactly what we mean when we talk about relevance. We have a real clear understanding when we talk about rigor. We have a real clear understanding so that when we have that common language, then we can start building from it on those. But those are some of the foundations that we really start at really kind of a microscopic level, and we build up from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Liakos.
Earlier tonight, the school committee debated and voted on its budget, so my questions are around resource management.
Fabulous.
We're hoping you can share some of your experiences developing, managing, and leading the budget process. A little background. So Wakefield has enjoyed a healthy period of fiscal growth, which has benefited the school district, and as well as helping us make much-needed improvements in quality teaching and learning. How would you lead us in planning for leaner times without losing this critical momentum?
It's a great question, because right now we know that the House is actually debating their portion of the budget right now, and there's also conversations going on at the state level about the Chapter 70 and the foundation budget and what is and isn't included in the foundation budget. We know that originally when Ed Reform Law went in, there was a number of factors that went into what the foundation budget looks for. But it didn't include things like the increases in health insurance. It didn't include the advancements in technology and the amount of technology that districts see. So the foundation budget formula isn't really keeping pace with what schools are needing to come up with. And so there's definitely some leeway in what we need to do with Chapter 70. I've had vast experience not only in just school budgeting, but I've also overseen 4 building projects, 4 school building projects, and overseen the budgets for 4 school building projects. I've done zero-based budgeting. I've done level services budgets. I've done level funded budgets. I've cut budgets. I've added budgets. But when you talk about how do you prepare for those, so let me give you a real specific example. Right now we have a budget that's about 83 million. Probably total, it's probably a little over 100 million, but some of it's kept on the city side. So benefits and transportation are held on the city side, but our local LEA budget is about $80 million. And in the urban districts, there's never enough money. That's just one of the factors. You can't rely and say, geez, here's a problem, and we're going to solve it by increasing money. It just doesn't exist. So we have to be really efficient and really effective with how we spend that money. So I oversee all the departments. So I pulled all my department heads in, the head of technology, the director of facilities, the finance director, the chief academic officer, the head nurse. I pulled everyone together and I said, I want you to do an audit of your budgets. And I want you to just understand it, but I want you to go back through and see how the money is actually spent. Now, we weren't overspending. No one was coming back in a deficit. But I just wanted them to have a real clear understanding of how the money was spent so we could make good decisions. You know, when doing that, we went through, and I think I told the group before, but we discovered that in doing so, that we were still paying 10 cents a minute for long distance. No one's been paying 10 cents a long distance since I think, like, the 1990s, early 90s on the reach out and touch someone commercials, right? But we discovered in many schools we were still paying 10 cents a minute for long distance. We were still paying for yellow page ads. We found that we had duplicate licenses for software. We found that we were paying for software for the transportation department that hadn't been used in 7-8 years. Now, a couple things happened. One, we discovered, hey, we really aren't spending our money really that efficiently. Now, in some cases, it was tens of thousands of dollars, which on an $82-83 million budget probably doesn't seem like a lot. But the message it clearly sent was that I watch the budget like a hawk. And in doing so, it built trust so that the finance department, the city side says, geez, you know what, this guy's really watches that budget closely, and he able to spend it efficiently. And that's what we want to do. I mean, everyone takes the budget, and we have $100, and as long as you finish the year with, you spent $99.99, that's managing the budget. But the reality is, the budget, the needs change. You might get a special ed student that moves into district, and you can't go back to the state or the town and say, geez, we need more money for that. So you have to constantly be looking at your budget. You have to look at the needs of the students and understand it so you can make changes as you go along. I always say the managing the budget isn't just the numbers. It's being able to recognize the needs of the school and being able to change and shift your priorities as you're going along. But if you've done that kind of work like we did, there's a trust that's built in doing that. So the trust between myself and the city auditor is really strong, so that he knows, that Chuck knows, I know exactly what's in that budget. So when I'm building one, he says, this isn't a guy who's putting a bunch of fluff in there. This is a guy who really understands that budget, is really make sure that it's being spent very efficiently, and is very knowledgeable about it. But you really, I mean, that's just part of the deal. You really have to be very mindful of it, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me, Mr. Fulgoni, Kaya is our school committee student representative.
Yes.
She has a question for you
Wonderful.
So obviously the superintendent is the public face of the school department,
Yes.
but oftentimes doesn't have much direct engagement with students. So what would you do to be better aware of the needs of students as they see them?
Well, it's kind of a shame that you say that the superintendent doesn't really have much direct interaction with the students. Because that's one of the parts I truly enjoy. When I got into this many years ago, it was never my intent to be a superintendent, was never my intent to be a principal, was never my intent. I just really believed that if I just did the best job I could, the rest of the pieces fell into place. And I got into it because I truly enjoyed working with kids. I loved being a coach. I loved being a teacher. I loved interacting with students, and I still do. And that's where I still have the fun. So it's a little sad for me to hear that you asked a question about superintendents not interacting with students, because I do. I love going to the soccer games. I love going to the football games. I go up and walk around Haverhill High School and talk with the kids. I still walk through the elementary schools. I still go into the kindergarten classrooms, because the rest of it is the stuff. That's doing the job, right? Managing the budget, the dealing with instructional, that's the dealing with the stakeholders, the working with the school committee. That's the job. That's the what we do. But the why we do it is the kids, right? The why, the reason I show up is because of the kids. What I do is all that stuff. That's the what I have to do, but it's the why I do it. The why I do it is because I truly enjoy working with the kids. So when I'm out there talking to kids, one of the things that came out of that is we discovered that we had kids that wanted to get involved with a crew, that wanted to start a crew team. So we beat the bushes, we came up with some donations, we got a couple boats, and so now we've got a pretty, a fledgling, but we've got a crew team. So that was conversations with the kids. It was conversations with the kids that made it so that we ended up with a gymnastics program. It's conversations with the kids that help shape a lot of what we're doing, because that's the why we show up every day. What we do is the rest of the stuff. But the why we show up is meeting with the kids. So that's what I've always done, and that's what I'll continue to do, because shaping the Wakefield Public Schools is really about you, right? It's not about us. It really isn't. We're doing this for you and for all the kids that are coming. And in order for us to do it the best we possibly can, how can we do it if we don't understand what it is that you need and what you want, right? Our jobs is to make that happen for you. The only way we can do that is by us chatting a lot, so.
So, Mr. Fulgoni, here in Wakefield, we try very hard to let our shared core values guide all that we do. A commitment to following our core values can be a strong tool in addressing dilemmas that come up, ethical or otherwise. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us a little bit about your own core values, what they are, and more importantly, how do you use them to make decisions?
Okay. One of my core values is certainly about access and equity. I mean, that really is the compass that points true north. And when I talk about that why do I come to work? Why do I continue to do the work I do? Why do I work so hard for my schools and my districts? It's to help to do that exactly, because I want to ensure that every student has access to the opportunities. I think that nature equally distributes talent, but it doesn't equally distribute opportunity. And I think that our job then becomes to ensure equity in terms of the distribution of opportunities, right? Some of us have more opportunities than others because of the family that we're born into, or some of us have more opportunities because of where we come from. Some of us have more opportunities because of socioeconomics. but the talent is equally distributed, right? That's given to all of us. So really my core value is about access and equity and ensuring that every student has access to the highest possible quality education and that there's equity, so regardless of what country you came from, what language you speak, whether you're on an IEP or whether you're on the gifted and talented, whether you're that you come into a school and every day you're valued, every day you have the same opportunities for success, every day you get a message that we're here for you and we're going to help you become successful and achieve. And that's the why I show up. That is the core value, and that's what drives what I do every day. The rest of it then becomes, as I said before, the what we do to make that happen. But every day I show up to ensure that every student, and being in an urban district where you have students in extreme poverty, students that are just coming here, when the hurricanes hit the Caribbean islands, we had a number of students that were pouring in to our city and continue to have students pour in, that they're walking in sometimes for the first formal education that they've had in years. Some of the students are showing up on our doorsteps, 16, 17 years old, with no adults. They just came here all on their own. And it becomes our role and our job and our duty to really ensure that those students have those same access and equity that any student does that's in our care. And that's why I show up.
Just as a follow-up, so, as can be the case in any district in Wakefield with 3,000 students, 500 employees, there's going to be times and instances where core values, beliefs, opinions clash between people. They mismatch.
Sure.
Can you share with us a situation where you had to mediate between parties whose values or beliefs or opinions were clashing or were mismatching or did not align, and how you handled that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you want to do is first, you want to make sure that you're listening to people. Even when people come in and they have conflicting, everyone wants to know that they're heard and that their opinion is respected. And when you can at least start with that framework, well, we may not agree, but at least if we can agree that we're both here because we care. Now, we may not agree on what it is we're getting to, but I have to at least recognize and respect you for coming and saying, geez, this is what I really feel, this is what, and you're passionate about it, and respect you for that. Then we start to look at what are those common grounds. It's kind of that interest-based bargaining, if you will. We look at, okay, what are those common grounds? What is it that you need in what you're advocating for? And what is it I'm advocating for? And how do we do that? And I've had to mediate those situations. What you do is you try to build off that common ground. What is that common understanding? And if they're just diametrically opposed, then what I've found is that they aren't sometimes as far opposed as you'd like to think. And usually, if you can get through the what's the motive behind it, even sometimes as a principal for 17 years, and even now, even this morning, I had parents call that were cranky because of whatever was happening in their school. They weren't happy with the principal. They weren't happy with the teacher. They'd moved up with the chain, and they just want to bark at someone. And I always tell them, you know what? I get it. It's okay. Bark at me because you care enough about your child to want to come and bark. Now, I may not appreciate the way you're doing it. I may not necessarily agree with the message, but I have to first and foremost let you know that, hey, you're here. You're willing to stand here and yell at me. You're willing to do it because you're telling me you care enough about your child to want to advocate and fight for them. It's the ones I never hear from, the ones that don't have anyone at home that's willing to fight for them. Those are the kids that I worry most about. I may not agree with the person that's coming and barking at me, but at least I know that they're an advocate for their child. And that's how we start to build for it. And by the end of that conversation I have with that parent, they've heard that message. And I respect that they have an opinion, that it's different, that I respect that they're a strong advocate for their child. And then we work from there and say, okay, I understand that. But we want what's best for your child as well, too. So let's see how we can begin to say, okay, can we agree that what you want is what's best for your child and what the school district wants is what's best for your child? So now we have a common ground to work from, and then we start to go from there. And you can usually find that common ground, even with values that maybe appear different, but there's usually a commonality that you can find, and then build from that point out.
Thank you. Okay, I will turn it back over to Mr. Markham.
Thank you. So at this time, as we're winding down our conversation tonight, I want to give you an opportunity to share any closing thoughts and to make sure that we have a full appreciation of your candidacy and why you'd be the next best superintendent for Wakefield.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think over the course, as we've gotten the chat a little bit, and as we've talked in previous meetings, and as have talked before, we've gotten to understand a little bit. And as I was explaining to one group of, I think, of parents that I was speaking with, I'm real clear saying that throughout this process, I've also been looking and saying, okay, is Wakefield a match for what I see? Or is it a match for my values? Is it a match for my leadership style? And the reality is my leadership style wouldn't be a match for everywhere. There are some places that are pretty prescriptive and want a pretty heavy-handed, top-down model of leadership. What I've been discovering in my conversations with folks at Wakefield is that really are looking for the skill set that I have, which is really as that of a collaborative leader, one that really works at bringing all the stakeholders together, one that really has those conversations, builds those authentic relationships, one that's going to build a culture where people feel safe to take positive risks, where people know that they're going to be supported in doing it. And that doesn't always mean, as I said, that we're always going to like every decision, because being the leader means you have to be able to make strong decisions. But I don't make decisions that people will like. I make decisions that people can respect. Right? You stand in the middle of the road, you get hit by traffic going both ways. Sometimes you have to make a decision. But I don't get much pushback on the decisions because people say, you know what, I may not like that, but I can respect that decision. I think that it's a really nice match for my leadership style. In the conversations I've been having with people, whether they're teachers or community members that I've spoken with, people seem to be excited and receptive and excited about that because it's a type of leadership that I really think is going to help the Wakefield School District continue to grow. I had a conversation with some folks and they said, we have a really strong college-going culture. We've done a lot of work around preparing students for college and career. And I said, okay. I said, but where's the rubber meeting the road on that? I said, it sounds, from what I see, is that you're preparing kids for college and you're measuring that by when the kids go off to college. Similar conversation I had in Haverhill, and I said, well, if we really want to prepare kids for college, then let's start doing that now. So through a partnership with Northern Essex Community College, Merrimack College, which I sit on the advisory board of, we were actually able to bring college courses into the school. We have some kids that are going to NECO. We have NECO professors that are coming into college. And I have students graduating from Haverhill High School with an associate's degree. So they're leaving Haverhill High School with an associate's degree and then able to transfer that to any of the UMass schools. So they're leaving Haverhill High School and starting in their junior year in college. So when we talk about college and career, we have kids, we're bringing it right to them. We're not waiting until they leave. Same thing with business partnerships, build strong business partnerships, where we have a business partnership with Trinity Ambulance, where those kids are coming in, we're doing coursework, we've created a pathway for those students, and those students are now graduating Haverhill High School, not as a certified nurse assistant, not with a CNA, but actually graduating as a licensed EMT. And those are the kinds of things. It's by building those business relationships. It's by building relationships with the higher education. It's by bringing all the stakeholders together that we're able to accomplish those things. I think it's a really great time. I think there's a lot of momentum in Wakefield, but I think my leadership style is a great match to help it then move up to that next higher level, that kind of how do we move from good to great? How do we do that? So I think it's a nice time and a great opportunity for all of us to be able to do that together. So that's great.
Well, Mr. Fulgoni, on behalf of the school committee, we appreciate you. We thank you for being an applicant for this position, and we thank you for spending your time this evening with us.
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
Thank you so much.
Glad to do it. Glad to do it. Glad to do it.
Good night.
Okay.
This is an unofficial question.
Well, I'll tell you that it was snowing as I was driving down.
We are still in session, gentlemen.
I think maybe a branch campus in Miami Beach. Certainly would be worth it.
Thank you. Okay, chairman's comments. So I just have 45 or 50 minutes of things that I need to go over. All right. Subcommittee reports. Anything from any of our subcommittees, Mr. Callanan?
We met with FinCom again yesterday, just to make sure that there were no further questions going into tomorrow night's FinCom discussion about our budget. Dr. Smith and her staff are presenting to FinCom tomorrow evening.
Excellent, thank you. Labor and Personnel, Mr. Markham.
We do not have any update other than what we've been doing for the last couple of months.
Excellent. Policy and Planning, Ms. Fortier.
We met, and I need to work on a couple of drafts of some policies that we will be presenting to the committee shortly.
Excellent, thank you. Future dates and agenda items. So our next actual meeting will be 1 week from tonight. That'll be our special meeting to discuss much of what we heard tonight. That'll be the 17th. The next school committee meeting, there's an error in our packet, so this is Tuesday, April 25th. It will be April 25th, but that's a Wednesday because of the town election. School committee comments. Anything from anyone?
I just wanted to add that last night, Chris and I accompanied Dr. Smith and Mike Pifferling before the Board of Selectmen, and we got a very positive and positive reception. We had a thoughtful conversation with them, and just wanted to thank the Board of Selectmen and Steve Mayo for giving us the chance to kind of give a big picture presentation on the budget and to give us some good constructive feedback on it. So just wanted to add that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Liakos. Ms. Morgan.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Markham for leading this search committee and all the participants in that, everyone who took the candidates to lunch and the community members. I think we have a really difficult decision ahead of us, and it's a good problem to have. So thank you.
Anyone else this evening? Okay, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adjourn our meeting of Tuesday, April 10, 2018.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rob.
Marathon Tuesday is complete.